Yep.
Okay. Thank you all so much, of course, for making the time both today and over the last year. I did want to note that we are just about 1 week shy of the 1-year anniversary of our very first convening. So I thought that was noteworthy. So in the spirit of what we have done since the very first day, and I know it's one of my favorite parts of the whole of what we do, we're going to go around and have the commissioners introduce yourselves with a name and with an answer to a question. And so today's question is, what is the most important way that these last 6 months have changed or affirmed your definition of a quality job? So I'm going to start, as I do, with our amazing co-chairs. James, would you like to start us off?
Sure. Good to see everybody. I think one of the things that the last 6 months have changed about a quality job for me is realizing that, in fact, that definition has to include health in a much more expansive way than perhaps we've thought about it before. And also has to include the way we think about safety nets. So this idea, the importance of safety nets has never been more stark in my mind. So those two things, Julie.
Thank you so much. And as usual, James models both the heart that everybody brings this work and also the brevity that we require in order to get through everybody and get to the substantive conversation. So thank you for that. I don't see Mary Kay. Mary Kay, am I missing you on my screen? Okay, so Mary Kay is probably about to come. So let me just go based on who I see. Betty?
Thanks, Julie. Great to see everybody. Yeah, I think what's really changed my thinking over the last 6 months is, and I'm not so sure that it changed it, it probably elevated it, and that's the whole concept of inclusion, the inclusion of all workers. When we talk about quality jobs, and certainly the vulnerability that we're seeing just across the board with all workers. But this is our chance to really, lift up those whom we've known for a long time are vulnerable.
Thanks so much, Betty. John?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? Great. So it's great to see everyone. I'll try to be brief as well. I think I'll give both a way in which my view of a good job has been affirmed and perhaps changed. Affirmed, really, I've always thought that a voice on the job was a really important aspect of a quality job. Having the ability to contribute your ideas, your input, your creativity, as well as potentially your disagreements with what's happening in the workplace. Hugely important, and that's certainly been reaffirmed. The other issue I would point to is the issue of exit. Having the ability to withdraw from a job that is not to your liking, that is not safe, as James indicated, has been truly underscored during this pandemic. As a union representative from a union of essential workers who've been forced to work often in unsafe conditions, that's been truly profoundly underscored by this crisis.
Thank you, John. Art.
Yes, hi. I want to apologize first. I was not able to make the last meeting, and nor was I able to read any of these materials in advance. But what strikes me about this is that there are so many jobs that are not quality jobs that we have the responsibility to try to repair and fix.
Thank you. Carla?
Yes, thank you. It's great to be with everybody today. I wanted to affirm on inclusion, Betty's comment, safety net, James. But I would say for me, just how essential it is to have paid time off. That has really changed and just elevated, given the pandemic, in my view. Thank you.
Lance?
On behalf of our industry sector, I think what this whole crisis has underscored for us is the notion that certain jobs must be performed on the job. And in the manufacturing sector, things don't make themselves. So we've been part of the critical infrastructure from day one, and kind of acknowledging that. I think society's trying to do a good job, but there's just this expectation that the grocery stores will remain open, the factories will remain open. People have to go there and work, and ensuring that there's a safe environment for them to do so is really the utmost importance. But it's brought in or elevated that notion to everyone, that certain people we rely on, whether they're frontline, essential, or however they're defined. Some people have to go to work. Now you can see today I'm in my office, but I only come into my office a few times a week, and I've been working remotely ever since. So many people don't have that option, and that's something that this particular crisis has underscored for me.
Thanks, Lance. Maria?
Thank you, Julie. I think one of the things that has been certainly highlighted in the work that we do is we've seen so much change and just the acceleration of change, and the need to ensure that that change results in inclusion. I think, James, I'm not sure if you said it or if it was Betty that said it, but I think one of the things that it's highlighted for me is the importance to ensure that that there's job access and that there's an inclusion framework in that.
Wonderful. Thank you, Maria. Doug?
Thank you, Julie. It seems that a lot of the men are wearing light blue shirts, and I just want to say we didn't coordinate around that. There's no Brown Act violation. Sorry, a little humor. I agree with folks that, so many of the issues we've led on in California, whether that's the misclassification of people as independent contractors or subcontracting out work through temp agencies, we're getting at these things that folks have raised about our social safety net and making sure that workers don't slip through the cracks. But on another and related note is that we have a lot of quality jobs in California that are created through the investment of our public dollars into public employees' jobs. And we've seen, whether it's not having enough people to staff the lines at EDD or to staff the fire lines here, that the systematic underinvestment in public services in the state of California, not only it's impacted all of us, jobs, communities, everything. So.
Thank you, Doug. Roy?
Just say that it affirmed for me that a quality job means having power, whether that's through an alternative to that job or a voice or in some other way.
Henry? I don't know if others can hear Henry. I can't hear him.
Am I here?
Okay, yeah, there you go. There you go.
Okay. Thanks for having me back. Sorry for missing the last few. Quality job, I guess, to me, in the last few months, is also what happens when you don't have a job and how much mechanics matter. Vision's important, but making the gears of it all function is much easier said than done, and Herculean challenge. We know you've been going through that, Madam Secretary, and huge lift on that end, but just that ensuring quality is really reliant on our ability to upgrade our mechanics and get the functions of government going right now more than ever.
Dr. Coley?
Yes, thank you very much for the question. I was always wondering, now, what is the question of this meeting going to be? So never disappoint. I would just say, picking up on what's already been said, being adaptive and elevating and prioritizing the health, safety, and well-being of all employees, and then examining with intentionality systemic racism in companies and organizations focused on access and opportunities for advancement.
Fei.
Hello, so great to see everybody. So, so many good comments. I just want to raise two thoughts. One is that in the sector I am in, we're very privileged. Many of my colleagues, students can work online, but I actually worry a lot about the mental health in this setting, especially colleagues and students who have been working from home, dealing with so many fronts. Second is that the advantages that the tech companies that have had shown, especially through the pandemic, underscores the importance of what future of work look like and the work of this committee.
Nice, wonderful. So I think maybe the ones that are left may not have been here when I started. So very quickly, the introduction question is, what is the most important way that the last 6 months have changed or affirmed your definition of a quality job? I'm gonna go to you, Ash.
Thank you. Good to see everyone. You know, I think it's definitely affirmed, especially being in Silicon Valley. You know, I think the COVID crisis has exacerbated existing inequities and aspects of our system that are apparently broken, including having healthcare attached to employment status, and the ability for workers to truly be respected and given dignity, even as they do essential work. And so, you know, I'm more committed than ever to fight for those workers and a future for those workers, because I think this crisis shows once again how much more we need to do to empower the voice of workers.
Mariana?
Good morning, everyone. Nice to see you all. So similarly, I echo a lot of what's been said, and on the one hand, I think it's sort of visualized what we've always deemed as sort of essential work, but that's become sort of more, you know, popularized and mainstreamed in terms of, you know, what is essential work and the value of that work, in particular domestic and care work. But at the same time, valuing it needs to also be demonstrated through higher compensation, access to kind of benefits and better conditions on the job, worker voice and power, and in particular, workers shaping not only their workplace, but in any conversation around economic recovery and what the future of their work should be. And as well, I think it's affirmed the kind of cracks and inadequacies of our safety net as workers lost their income security from one day to the end and didn't have access to unemployment, paid leave, and had to make difficult decisions about whether they would be able to remain in their home, put food on their table for their children, or put their life sort of at risk to be able to continue to work.
Thanks, Maria. Hi, Mary Kay. Mary Kay.
Hi, Julie. I'm so sorry. I heard you calling my name, but I could not find the unmute button. It's wonderful to be with all the other commissioners. I'm looking forward to this conversation. And I would say what's been affirmed for me, Julie, is some of what I've heard from my fellow commissioners about the systemic and structural problems, both in terms of poverty wage work and systemic and structural racism. But in spite of those barriers, what has been affirmed for me is that workers that are trapped in those structures that have never worked for them are doing the best quality job they can possibly do in impossible circumstances. And what's been affirmed for me is the resilience of working people that actually care deeply about serving customers in fast food restaurants or doing their very best for elders in nursing homes, even as the stakes for their own lives and their families' lives are at an all-time high. And I've just been blown away about the determination and desire of those workers to get a seat at the table through their union and contribute to making those jobs the best quality possible, because they have always understood they were essential. And so I feel I come to this convening with a lot of hope that we share a commitment about unleashing that untapped human potential and helping it power the California economy and democracy.
Beautiful. Peter?
Good morning. You're not going to see my face this morning. Apologies. I'm being treated for pre-cancers on my face with a medicine that makes me look like something out of a horror movie. So as a favor to all of you, I've not got my camera on, but I'm here. So I want to put this question in a kind of context. I agree with essentially everything everybody's been saying. I think there's a kind of regular theme that we've been talking about, and I want to put that in context. I do a lot of work in Singapore. And in the course of a major planning exercise that we're still in the middle of there, one of the futures team there came up with a very big idea that I think frames some of what we're talking about. You know, we're used to talking about big government, big technology, big business. But I think what they articulated is that we may be moving into an era of what you could call big social, where social values, now not just economic values, not political interests, not even technological interests, really become very powerful driving forces. In some ways, like the 60s, that there is a kind of reawakening of the kind of social movements. It was civil rights, it was anti-war, it was women's rights, it was human rights. All of those kinds of things were very powerful. And social movements, of course, still persisted, but we have not seen that kind of explosive wave of social change that really was driven by those movements in the 60s since that time. And I think the pandemic has triggered a new era of what you might call big social. In Singapore, they associated it with, for example, the values that we heard earlier in one of our convenings from Scandinavia, Hygge, H-Y-G-G-E. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing it properly, but Hygge. Basically, that sense of social connection to everybody in your society, that everyone matters to you and you matter to everyone else, that sense of deep connection. So I think if you think about it that way, this could be a moment of big change, where jobs are not simply only economic. Yes, they're economic, and they're not only a way of providing value to you and you to society, but they're a sense of social connection, and that all of us connect in a very deep way. And that what we're seeing is that beginning, I think, possibly, and it's not a done deal by any means, it's a movement, it's not a result, it's a process that is leading somewhere. So I think what we're likely to see is a new wave of social movements focusing on jobs that deal with respect, equality, all the kinds of values that we're seeing. And so this is, I think, a historic shift triggered by the pandemic that will lead to a broader wave of change, yes in jobs, yes in employment, but more broadly in society, in some ways analogous to what we've seen in the 1960s. So big social.
Thank you. Peter, I'm sure I speak for everybody in that we would love to see you anyway, but we'll leave that up to you. Saru?
Hi, everybody. It's great to see you. Sorry I was a little late. I mean, there's so much one could say, and there's so many different ways in which this has revealed and confirmed many of the things we've been fighting for. And I, definitely align with what Mariana and Mary Kay said in terms of workers knowing they were essential and feeling it. What's on my mind today is that for tipped workers, not just in other parts of the country, but in California, it has affirmed that living off of tips was never a stable or real or legitimate or moral way to live for workers. And now that tipped workers in California, about 1 million of them, are being, in many cases in restaurants, asked to enforce social distancing rules and masks with the very same customers from whom they have to get tips to survive. is a public health disaster. Either they're not going to enforce the rules to get their tips, or they are going to enforce the rules and not earn the tips. And so that needs to be of concern to everybody, because last week the CDC reported that you're twice as likely to get COVID if you ate in a restaurant. And so I just think, to Mary Kay's point, like, these workers knew they were essential. They've become more essential, protecting not only themselves, but the public from the spread of the pandemic. And if we're going to continue with this system of letting them live off of tips, then we have to do a hell of a lot more to protect them right now. And I want to echo the fact that I think it's not going to come entirely from us. Tipped workers went on strike at the end of August in 2 cities. They'll be striking in multiple cities at the end of September, and it's just going to keep growing because there's real momentum for change. And the momentum's actually not even just coming from workers. We have been overwhelmed with hundreds of restaurant owners in California and across the country, independent restaurant owners, not chains, who are coming up to us and saying now is the time for change. So I do see change on the way, despite the apocalyptic conditions and the days where it feels like everything's wrong. There's definitely momentum for change.
Thank you so much, Saru. That's a perfect last comment before we move into the agenda for today. So in the interest of time, I'm going to just very quickly, I think, does everybody have the agenda in front of them? It's really very simple. We are going to turn to our co-chairs to give us an overview of the proposed path forward. What is this social compact for work in California? Both, in terms of our original mission, which again, coming up on our 1-year anniversary, is such a great time to reflect on all that's happened over the last year, but also in ways that have been completely, accelerated by the crises of the last few months. I just want to say 2 things, well, 3 things. Let me say one on behalf of, I know, the governor's team and the IFTF team. One reason why we continue to do the introductory questions is I always find them to be such a great grounding for what we're about to launch into. And it's also just a sign of how much personal commitment you all have made through your whole, body of work that you bring to this commission. And I feel grateful, for California, for the governor, for all of us, that you all have made this commitment and been in it longer than you expected to be in it because of the crises. So really feeling a great deal of gratitude to all of you. There's 2 things I just want us to keep in mind as we go through today. One substantive, one more procedural. The substantive one is that, as we head into the home stretch, I know that we are going to talk about, and these 5 priorities reflect big, I think, like amazing and wonderful ideas that are reflective of all the thinking and the input that this commission has had. I want to remind us of the charge at the beginning, which was not just to think big, but also to think of actionable items, things that we can actually do, that the governor can embrace, that we can actually make happen. So there is the work of, how does the moonshot idea turn into something that we can actually do? And this body is charged with coming up with, doing the hard work of thinking that through, right? We were not just to come up with ideas, we were to come up with specific things that could be done. So one is to remember that charge of being really concrete and being actionable. And then the second, the procedural one, is that because our time is always so limited, I'm really going to be very active today. I'm going to apologize in advance, but also say that, I think we can see the need for it to really try to keep the conversation driving forward. We have 5 priorities to get through, to be respectful of the really incredible work that the 2 co-leads of each area have done. We want to make sure that we give ample time to all 5 of them. So just a reminder, right, if a comment's already been made, within the Zoom, there are ways to, applaud, to give a thumbs up, to show that. Let's not repeat something that one of your colleagues has already said. And please, again, forgive me if I try to push us through to try to make sure that we get to the end of the day having covered everything we want to cover. So I'm going to be stricter about that than I think we sometimes are. And I know that's has special challenges in Zoom, so apologies again in advance. for cutting off anything that anybody wants to say that we're not going to have time to say in order to give time for everything. So let me turn this over to James and Mary Kay, who have shepherded us through to this point with such care and love and expertise. James and Mary Kay.
Well, thank you, Secretary Sue. Let me kick us off. Again, it's wonderful to see everybody. Let me do a couple of quick things before and do a brief recap of where we are, particularly also to bring along commissioners who might have missed the last couple of sessions. So brief recap, if you recall, we met back in April, and at that time we put together and issued an interim report. And if you remember, our interim report primarily did two things. It identified kind of 11 key challenges that we felt strongly that were challenges for workers in California and things that were challenging work. And we had identified about 12 draft recommendation areas where we thought these could actually move the needle and make a difference for work and workers in California. We got together in July, and in that discussion, I think we spent most of our time reflecting back on what is it that we had learned in addition, given what was going on with COVID. So we captured, and a lot of that was actually captured in the notes that were captured, and all that's we're not gonna lose it. All your inputs about learnings from COVID were captured. And I think we concluded both in that discussion and also at least when Mary Kay and I got together to reflect back on where we were, that we actually had 4 things to do for the remainder of this commission. I think the first one was, I think there was a sense that we do want to update our interim report to make sure we add to it the things that we've learned since COVID. So that's work we're gonna have to do in some form or fashion to make sure we update that, because I think there was a strong sense that we've learned quite a few more things, actually, some of which you've echoed here in the opening conversation, but others that were brought up in July. So that's action thing number 1 that we have to do. Second, I think we talked a lot about how we wanted to take advantage of the Governor's Task Force and other mechanisms. The Governor's Task Force is obviously a big, powerful one because it happens to include many of the important institutions in California, employers, workers' unions, civic society, many participants. There were about 100 people on that task force, but we wanted to take advantage of that task force to see if we could embed as many of the things that this commission felt strongly about into that task force as a way to action them. I think some of that has already happened. We talked about some of that in our July convening. And I think there's many more things like that that we want to make sure keep getting embedded into that task force, but also to take advantage of some of the things that some of you were doing, even outside of the task force. I think there were commissioners who are involved in initiatives in their own right, in various forms of fashion. So I think there's a second goal here, which was to make sure all the things, many of the things that we've thought about get actioned, leveraging all these different vehicles available to us, the most prominent of which is the Governor's Task Force. So that was goal number 2. Then I think there was a goal that came up out of that discussion in July, which I think there was a desire by everybody to try and take advantage of, I think it might have been Tom or others who remind us of the Overton window. It might have been Peter too, to the idea to say, can we take advantage of this moment to do something even bigger around either a single idea or a few set of priorities? So some of you gave us some thoughts through the survey that you all filled in. You also gave us as your co-chairs to the charge to think about that and reflect on everything we've learned from this commission, from participating on the Governor's Task Force and everything else, to come up with what that could be. So that goal number 3 is really the thing we're going to spend almost all our time on today. That doesn't mean that goal number 1 and goal number 2 are not important that I just described. They're very, very important. We'll get to them at some point, but that's not today. So we're going to spend time on goal number 3, which is the charge you gave us and the input you gave us on that. There is a final practical goal too, by the way, goal number 4, which is we will need to write and deliver a final report by the end of the year. So let's not forget that, because we are all on the hook for that. We have to do that. So hopefully that's useful by way of recap of where we are. Now with that, let me go into what I described as goal number 3, which is the charge you all gave us collectively to come up with what's the big thing or set of things that we want to do. And by saying the big thing or the set of things, it doesn't mean that we're ignoring everything else we've captured. No. Those are still actionable things we still have to do. But could there be something even bigger and signature that we do? So with that, the way we thought about that, given your charge and your input in the survey, is to say, rather than just identify particular priorities, which we do, we wanted to put them in the context of what we thought was a single big idea, which is around this idea of a social compact for work in California. So that's sort of the big umbrella signature thing that we're proposing that this commission do. And we think that the reason we think that is important is because we think it's actually quite critical to, have that be a way to set a set of commitments and foundational ideas and actions that govern how we involve everybody. And I think we like the idea of a social compact, partly because it involves everybody, because we don't think this is just about, one part of that of civic society, but everybody. It's about employers, it's about workers, it's about our educational institutions, but it really is a compact. Maybe it echoes a bit what Peter was describing as the big social, I think is what Peter described it as. But we think this idea of a social compact is in fact the big idea. Now, but we do think it has 3 elements to it. One piece of it, we think there are a few specific principles around which we think that social compact should work. We think that there are also, as a second item, a set of signature priority or centerpiece actions and priorities that are essential to that social compact. And then we also think that there's a third piece, which are actual actions that need to be designed, whether they come in the form of programs or legislation or initiatives that have to be in place or be put in place to actually deliver on those priorities and on that social compact. So I'd urge you to keep in mind those 3 pieces: the principles, the centerpiece priorities, and then of course, ultimately the actions and programs and all of the things that have to come together to make all that real. I'm going to spend a little bit of time on the principles, and then I'll hand over to Mary Kay, who will lead us in a brief discussion on the centerpiece priorities and how we got to those. So let me start with the principles. We think that there are at least 4 that really, really matter, that have to be foundational in this social compact. And they're as follows, and you have these in the materials. I think the first one is this idea that the social compact has to promote equity of people in place. We're a big, diverse state. We've already seen all the impacts that work has on different kinds of people, racially, ethnically, gender, and in all the other ways. We've also come to understand the diversity of places in California. California doesn't look the same everywhere. And we as a commission have spent time in various places. We understand that. So this principle of equity is critical, and whatever we do, we think it has to be there. And here we also want to take advantage of 2 things, actually. One, which is the work that this commission has done on understanding the challenges on equity of people in place, but also the governor's task force, with the involvement of quite a few of us, came up with these equity principles that have actually been quite helpful, even in the work of the task force itself. I would urge all of you, if you haven't actually read those, they're quite powerful. Many of us who are on the task force, Betty and Maria and Mary Kay and others, we've all seen those, in fact, participated in writing those. We think they're actually quite important. So that's principle number 1, which is around equity of people in place. The second principle is around making sure we are empowering workers. I think this has come up quite a bit in our conversations that, empowering workers actually means many, many things. It means giving them voice, means giving them the ability to make choices. I think we talked about exits. I think John brought up the idea of being able to even exit. We talked also about the idea of rebalancing what feels like an unbalanced power situation when it comes to work and workers. So this second principle about empowering workers and rebalancing power, I think, is an important principle. A third principle is again implicit, which is we have to involve everybody. This has to involve everybody, all these different stakeholders, but especially employers, workers, and the social and educational and training institutions who are so critical to this, but also investors and nonprofits and others who are going to help build infrastructure and capabilities to make all this work. So the principle here is that this isn't about one constituent, it's about all of them that have to do and touch the idea of work. And then the fourth principle is one that many of you have actually emphasized, which is we have to be forward-looking. We know that many of these issues are obviously things that have been in place and structural challenges for many years, but we also have to look forward. We know that there are many more things that are coming that are going to create other challenges. We know that we need to be ready for probably even more pandemics, the impact of technology, and many, many other things. So we have to be forward-looking. So that's the fourth principle. So these are principles that we felt, drawing from all the conversations that we had, that this social compact must have, and all our initiatives should be guided by these principles and should include them and embrace them. And we can even think about using them as a test, if you like. So when we come up with actions and we come up with ideas, it's worth testing, are they consistent with these four principles? Now, this is a draft, of course. We're not saying these are the only principles, but we felt quite strongly that having a handful of principles, 4 or 5, was going to be quite important, and making these almost the test for whatever we come up with, to say, do they meet and satisfy these principles? So let me stop at that point and hand over to Mary Kay.
Thank you so much, James. I just think it's worth taking a breath because I thought you just did a masterful job on a concept that the commission, I don't know if the rest of you remember, this notion of a social compact kind of percolated almost through every convening. And I was personally very grateful for your faith in James and I and Julie, who was a part of thinking this through with us, in saying, hey, there's a pandemic, there's an economic crisis, there's a racial justice uprising, and now an environmental national emergency. Put your heads together and make a proposal to us. And I just appreciated the chance to take the year of work we'd done together and stake a position that you all could react to and make better. But I don't know about the rest of you. I think that what James just laid out, if we can land it with unity across sectors in California that this commission represents, and use it as a test to the actionable things that you all were very anxious to make sure this commission report was not a document that sat on a shelf, but was a blueprint for action that we actually brought to life, that this is the frame we offer. We then put our heads to, if you agree, and there will be time to react to this, but let's pretend for a second we have unity on these principles. The question then was, given the future of work analysis of the problems and the structural inequality in the economy and democracy, what mattered most for intervening and catalyzing a shift that wasn't incremental or on the margins, but kind of went to the heart of the inequality. That was the way James and I thought. And based on listening to all of you, both for the last year, but most especially in the April convening, we thought that the centerpiece priorities that would bring these principles to life we propose 5. You could make them 3, you could make them more, but again, in terms of the crisis and mayhem that each of us are managing, we tried to be selective about what mattered most. So the first, ensure there are jobs for everyone who wants to work. The second, eliminate working poverty. The third, create a 21st century worker benefit model and safety net. The fourth, raise the standard and share of quality jobs that our intro question spoke directly to. And 5, future-proof California with jobs and skills to prepare for technology, climate, and other shocks that makes every working adult able to adapt quickly, because we've made actionable the social compact and then created the mechanisms that allow for people to learn and adapt in an ongoing way in their lives that many of our recommendations spoke to. We sent these priorities out in a document on Saturday from James, again on Monday from Anmal. And Julie, you tell me, it feels like the specifics under each one will be dealt with by the co-leads. So I don't think I need to animate them anymore because we're about to dig deep. Okay, I see the, I just wanted to say, that for me, the connection between a frame of principles that contradicts my life experience in the United States of America, where no principles like this or social compact has existed, to declare as a Future of Work Commission that we want that for the 40 million plus people in this state would be catalytic for the nation, 1. And 2, they won't mean anything if we don't act. And that's why these 2 things in James and Julie's minds have to come together. And I just wanted to acknowledge that James is going to go through, I think, the next steps here, James. But before I turn it back to you, James, I just want to acknowledge to the commissioners, which goes without saying, but it deserves intention, that Julie considers James and I shepherds, but she is part of the shepherding. And the thing I love about Julie's leadership as a shepherd is she leads from the front, she leads from the middle, and in the biblical story I learned as a child, that means you learn the smell of the sheep, and then you lead from the back, because the sheep understand that you can move to and from in order to move the herd forward. And I just want to be grateful, Julie, for in the midst of dealing with one of the worst crises as labor secretary, you were also totally on the case in catalyzing the co-leads and equipping us to benefit from the thinking of multiple commissioners in this convening. Thank you. James, the next steps.
Yeah, thank you. As we get into next steps of how we propose we work through this, this is in part informed by our guidelines as a commission and how we can actually work as a commission, and both the Bagley-Keynes rules that guide that work. So that's why you'll see in the design here the fact that we reached out to many of you with the idea of having at least 2 commissioners, given our rules, who can spend a lot of time with each other, but also reach out to the world, as it were, and anybody who has any input in their individual capacity to help shape this. So that's why you see the next steps have kind of 2 commissioners shepherding each of these topics. So that's part of the next steps design, if you like, quite deliberately. But I think the work to be done is to think about, so what would some of those programs, initiatives, and actions be? And I think the idea for the commissioners who are going to lead this isn't so much to go draft legislation, So they're not going to do that, just to be perfectly frank. But they are going to think a lot about, if there was to be legislation, what should it address? If there are to be programs, what should they address? What should they look like? If there are going to be initiatives, what should they look like? Who should they involve? So we hope that the commissioners will think about actions in that way. They will also think a lot about what are the goals, because one of the important things that I think many of you have highlighted is, if we're going to have these big priorities, it'd be good to have goals where we can actually see how we're doing against them. So are we achieving them? Have we achieved them? Are we on the path to do that? You could imagine every year, every 2 years, every period saying, how are we doing on our goals? Are we getting close or not? So there's an idea also here about not just the actions and programs, but also a sense of what is the goal? Where do we want to be in 3 years' time? I mean, one of the things the commissioners emphasized a lot, if you remember, the first time we talked about moonshot goals, I think there were 10-year goals, and I think everybody wanted to bring them much closer in, and we all agreed 10 years is too long. We want to have more things that look more like 3 to 5 year goals. So we hope that the commissioners will also think about, for each of these, what those goals could look like. We've encouraged, and we are going to encourage those commissioners also to seek input wherever they can, but do it in a very pragmatic, quite frankly, pragmatic, judicious fashion, because we don't have an infinite amount of time. So we may not, the idea isn't to go do a whole bunch more research. Actually, the answer is no, but to capitalize on everything we've learned on this commission, all the ideas that people have, and trying to have something quite concrete. So don't feel this is an exercise to go do a whole bunch more research. No. We don't think we need to do more research. We've had lots of inputs. We've had lots of discussions. Let's now just say what we think needs to happen. So those are the next steps. We anticipate that all of that will end up in the actual report that we write. We hope that it'll also then mean there'll be pickup of these things by, whether it's by the governor or other participants in the social compact, as we've said, who will take it up to do these things, hopefully with the state and California leading, but we hope with everybody participating. So those are how we see the next steps, and this will all come back up to us in the next set of meetings that we're going to have. Anmol and Julie and Lande and Mary Kay, have I left anything out?
No, that was absolutely perfect, James. And I'm glad you mentioned, Lande and Anmol. This has been such an extraordinary team effort on every front. So I think what we should do is jump right into the co-leads. And there will be, I know that commissioners will have questions, comments about everything that Mary Kay and James just presented, right? From the principles to the priority areas. But I think it makes sense, given our time today, but also our time in the life of the commission, to have that conversation in a concrete context of each of the priority areas, and also to give recognition, right, to the co-leads who've spent an enormous amount of time preparing to be here. So let me turn it over to Betty and to Saru, who are going to talk about our priority about eliminating working poverty.
Great, thanks, Julie, and really appreciate the level setting by James and Mary Kay, and it's really truly an honor to work with Saru on this priority area. Eliminating working poverty, and I think the way we're going to present this is really just how we kind of have the discussion around this area. But as this was presented to us as a priority area, it really gave some context with respect to nearly 45% of the 7 million Californians in poverty reported living in a family with at least one family member working full-time. And working poverty, no surprise, is the highest in the service sector and in work enabling sectors like care work. And it is particularly the highest among Latinos, African Americans, and adults with lower levels of education. And so, the priority demands that we address both work and work adjacent issues that contribute to working poverty. And so, I think there were several threshold issues that Sarah and I just worked through. The first is, how do we define working poverty? And I think I just gave voice to that, that we're not going to tie it to any official index of any kind, but that, this is really experiential. And we're seeing it throughout our economy and our society. In terms of developing recommendations, we did come to a conclusion that we could look at recommendations in terms of application economy-wide, or do we want to be sector specific, understanding how diverse the service sector is itself. A threshold issue that really we felt like there was no decision to be made, and that is just being very intentional, that we are going to focus recommendations on our communities of color, our low-income communities, women, other disproportionately affected communities that face barriers to employment. And then with respect to this issue about recognizing work adjacent issues, I think part of the effort to do that, and I'll just speak for myself on this since I know Sarah has thoughts about this, I just felt like just kind of moving away from the focus on work and workers. What was the likelihood if we just started to spend a lot of time on work adjacent issues? And so rather than directly address them, we hope that by just the thrust about how we lift up all workers is going to be a good part of the solution. And then in recommending moonshots, just a decision about whether we are going to look at building on existing models or designing, something completely new. And so I'm going to turn to Saru, but obviously there's some typical approaches for how we address working poverty, and then we'll share some of those before going into the specific framework in the moonshot.
Yeah, thank you, Betty. It's been a pleasure to work with Betty on this. So in terms of our approaches to addressing working poverty, there are a lot of things that we've already been talking about a lot throughout our time together as a commission. So I'm going to talk about the first 5. And Betty will do the next 5. So key approach to addressing working poverty is increasing the minimum wage, whether it's enacting living wage ordinances, bills, but also multi-pronged strategies to lift wages in various sectors. So increasing the minimum wage, particularly for low wage workers, requiring paid sick leave and family leave, enforcing existing labor standards for worker protections and rights, such as ending wage theft and upholding the right to organize, and thinking about, because enforcing wage theft is such a no-brainer and should already exist, thinking about how we enforce these things in a way that increases workers' ability to organize and their right to organize. Enforcing anti-discrimination laws in hiring, promotion, and pay to close race and gender inequities, and also ending discrimination against undocumented workers, farm workers, domestic workers, foster youth, and formerly incarcerated workers.
So we recognize that some of the approaches will likely overlap with some of the other priority areas, but did want to give voice to ensuring the availability of affordable childcare, elder care, and again, recognizing that care is a work enabling sector and also a work adjacent issue. So it's complex in that way, but I hope that we can get our arms around it as definitely at least a parallel effort to all of these priority areas. Increasing the availability of apprenticeship opportunities such that workers can pursue a better job or advancement through training, retraining, or education while still being paid on a job. Directing job creation and public investments. So when we have infrastructure investments to really direct those investments to high unemployment and other disproportionately affected communities. This is our equity pursuant to place priority. Authorizing sectoral bargaining. This is really a way that I think we can capture and ensure the inclusion of more and traditionally underrepresented workers. And I think when I spoke in response to Julie's question at the beginning of this meeting, this notion of inclusion, my daily fear is just seeing this distance keep growing in terms of those that have been traditionally excluded, and what the work that we're doing here, hopefully to bring them in to be included in any of the solutions that we're talking about. And then also looking at really a conscious efforts about how we can promote broader workplace democracy and worker ownership. And I think this is really kind of what I would call the future-oriented approach about just new ways of how we're going to do work, new business models, how workers are going to be very much the core and center of how we look at every employer and business enterprise. So moving into the framework, we, as I mentioned earlier, being very intentional about prioritizing disproportionately affected communities. We want to be sure that the solutions are measurable, both by number of individuals lifted out of working poverty and by the total amount of public and private resources that have been expended. Looking at including all stakeholders in the development and implementation of the solutions. We talked about that as really being the most impactful, and James did a great job of covering the importance of that. We also put down as part of the framework, increasing the effectiveness of existing fiscal resources. I think, sometimes we are all in search of that next new shiny thing. And I think this is really the time to talk about what we're doing with our current resources and is it the most effective use of them. We want to ensure that solutions can be replicated, at least within an industry sector. And then also supporting entrepreneurship. And this is going to probably require some state support so small businesses can build capacity as well.
So in thinking about what we can actually do, given these approaches and framework, Betty and I thought it would be good to focus on key sectors of low-wage workers who really encompass the majority of working people in poverty in California. 3 sectors in particular we wanted to focus on: care, hospitality, and retail, being the 3 kind of most significant, certainly largest sectors of low-wage workers. We thought that perhaps we could start with thinking about retail being the largest and hospitality. And create a moonshot around those 2, and then work together with the other co-leads on the other sectors in the other segments around care, since care is a little bit more complicated. So for the moonshot, there's a word just missing, but basically our moonshot thinking is that we want to reduce working poverty among retail and hospitality workers first, thinking about a model to do that by 33% by 2025 to ensure lasting economic health and housing security. And we think that's pretty achievable, pretty doable. It's a very large sector, but through the recommendations we're about to go through, we think it's pretty doable. And then if we were to focus on retail and hospitality, with these recommendations we're about to go through, there's a lot more we can do on care as well. So I believe, can't remember the order here.
Sorry, why don't you take the first 2 and I can.
Okay, sure.
Yeah. Okay.
So in terms of practical, achievable recommendations, we want to first talk about increasing worker power and elevating workplace democracy. So we are thinking about a sectoral bargaining pilot in the service sector and the hospitality and retail sectors in particular, to encourage coverage, to expand the coverage of workers with respect to pay, benefits, and working conditions. And also, given the moment and the huge numbers of unemployed service workers, support the development of worker cooperatives statewide as a strategy for economic recovery, and also incentivizing companies to transition to worker ownership. So sectoral bargaining, a big piece of this, we think could really help increase worker power and elevate workplace democracy, and then also worker cooperatives. 2, funding high road employment programs, refocusing and increasing access to state and local workforce development and training funds for high road apprenticeships, scaling up successful high road partnerships, and designating a portion of new revenue to workforce development on the job employment programs. For example, should Proposition 15 pass, its implementation should include an employment component for assessors' offices. So those are 2 key practical things we think we can do.
The other aspect of what we thought was practical and achievable really speaks to the state of California itself, and that's about the state walking the talk. Really hoping that we can ensure that all state workers are earning a minimum wage, including our IHSS workers, and also that all recipients of public assistance programs are receiving their grants as part of strategies to eliminate working poverty. So their grants can serve potentially as a bridge while a person is in training or reskilling or going back to school. Also creating an effective bridge for workers in job transition. I think this is the one aspect that I certainly personally have been in touch with so many workers who, and we know this as a fact, that for any worker that comes to the end of a job for whatever reason, doesn't have continuous employment, just has a setback with respect to their earning potential. And so here, looking at how we recast existing programs such as work sharing, perhaps the Earned Income Tax Credit Program and others to provide a more effective bridge for workers in working poverty. Maybe even directing some rainy day fund resources to provide some sort of a basic income for workers in transition. And then lastly, supporting enforcement of worker protections. And this is really about adequately resourcing the enforcement of existing labor laws. I spoke earlier about addressing work adjacent issues, and I think, one of the ways that I do think we should be thinking about some of these issues, we haven't talked a lot about our tax structure in California, but, as the governor early in his administration gave voice to reforming our tax structure, I hope that the reform is really around these issues that this commission has been focused on, and to address some of the income disparities, rewarding work, and also as a way to really address some of the work adjacent issues that do sorely need to be addressed. I think to Mary Kay's point, I'll just end with this about how we kind of track and monitor progress here. So much of this is around the issue of resources, and to the extent that the governor really wants to take this on as a way that we really do something ambitious, I can see the annual budget process really be about how we just completely kind of retool the budget in education, in our safety net, and what we do with our workforce programs to just really kind of have that be the grounding about how we get some of this work done along with our other stakeholder partners. And so I can't think, and with Senator Stern and Ash Kara in our assembly, I just think it would be a phenomenal articulation of priority if we were to just use our annual state budget for this purpose. So with that,
can I say just one last thing? Sorry, I just feel like it would be so remiss for us not to just say for 1 second, given what we're all experiencing with the wildfires, that I think everybody knows that about 1/3 of the people fighting the wildfires right now are as incarcerated workers. And while it was a huge step forward for the governor to ensure that they are able to get jobs, why can't we pay people a minimum wage while they're out there fighting our wildfires? I think if fire is an increasing reality for the state of California, that has to be part of eliminating working poverty.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, Betty. Thank
I
you.
think with that, we are ready to turn it back over to James and Mary Kay.
Well, first of all, I just have to say this was a tour de force. Thank you, Sarah and Betty. In some ways, I was just saying in the chat, you've set an impressively high bar for the rest of us. But seriously, I mean, what I loved about, we'll obviously work through the details. It was aspirational, it was bold, it was pragmatic. You had draft goals in there. You had a very thoughtful kind of sector by sector approach. I love, Sarah, what you said, we're going to start here, and you can imagine going through other sectors. It also had elements of utilizing resources that are already in place and making them more effective. It also had aspects of enforcing things that we already have on the books. So as opposed to creating new things. So I thought that was terrific. So thank you. That was my comment. Mary Kay and Julie should jump in, and Lande.
Without a doubt. I think, so we have, unfortunately, we only have about 20 minutes for each of these. I also just, I won't repeat it. I will just say ditto to everything that James said about the practicality, the vision. So I think we want to open it up and let people comment. Unfortunately, again, we have 5 minutes now for this. And I think we have to really think through how we, in the context of the rules we have and other things, it allow for more engagement. But Mary Kay, if you're okay with it, let's see if people want, if there's any comments from the commissioners. Does that sound right to you?
Yes, and we can encourage, given 5, that positive questions could go into the chat so that if we can't milk it verbally, we'll be able to get it through the chat. And then we can see the slide that for anybody that's on the phone and not looking at the slide, we want the public comment portion to include reaction to what you just heard from Betty Yee and Saru Jaruman. And then you can go to cafutureofwork@gmail.com to offer your thoughts for the public that has joined the commissioners. But yes, I agree, Julie. Let's go to commissioners' questions. If people want to either raise their hands as participants, that's the way for us to see since we have the slides up. And we have Art Pulaski, Roy Bahat, and Doug Block in that order. Art.
Thank you. What you laid out was very impressive indeed. My question is, and this may be the question of the day for us as we approach the election some 7 or 8 weeks away now, and that is, how do we deal with employers that don't want to do this? For example, we have Uber, which is leading this ballot measure now, having put $180 million into it, the most expensive ballot measure in history of the United States. That will do 3 things counter to our interests here. And how do we deal with these? For example, their ballot measure would eliminate for a huge workforce of almost 500,000 workers in California, all the rights and protections that state law provides for workers, from unemployment insurance to sick days, to family leave and all of that would all be eliminated. It would eliminate permanently the ability of those workers to have a voice and to organize. And it would require 7/8% to alter this new law. 7/8 is something I've never heard of before, but that's what they've created in this ballot measure called Proposition 22. So how do we address this in terms of this great dilemma we now face?
Excellent. Art, thank you. So can we do all 3 of the comments and then go back to Betty and Sarah to hear thoughts? Is that okay with you, Art?
I think that makes sense. Roy is next, and then Doug.
And then John, I think, and then can we just close there and then move, and okay.
Great.
Go ahead.
Great.
I'm wondering about putting an idea on the table, which is if we look through these various areas and imagine thoughtful dissections of the various proposals that are possible in each one, I kind of see all these proposals fanning out, and now we have 5 areas and each one has many proposals and ... And eventually I wonder if we end up with a recommendation that does again feel like a laundry list when we were trying to avoid it. And so at the risk of proposing something that's beyond the pale, one area that feels like it could cut across several of these 5, including land here, is a jobs guarantee. And, the federal government would be the natural entity, but I mean, literally our state is on fire right now. And while I totally appreciate the practicality and savvy of the sectoral prioritization and changing the tax policy, I wonder whether our commission's time is better spent deliberating over some enormous action that we could call on others to do, with the state of California playing some role or doing something as a backup. So I don't expect discussion on that right now, but that's the kind of thing that I would love to see come out of this process.
I think it's really helpful, Roy, to plant that seed, and I think we should come back at the end, because you're posing hey, this is a great approach, but maybe given the escalating emergency status, we should streamline and do one bold stroke. So let's let's come back to that idea. Doug Block, and then I'm sorry, I didn't, John Marshall also has his hand up. Julie, great.
Yep,
Doug.
exactly.
Thank you. I'll try to keep this brief. I really appreciate the recommendation for us to adequately resource the enforcement of existing labor laws, and I want to applaud that. But I also need to raise attention, which I think is going to come up in the portable benefits discussion, is that obviously federal labor laws that give workers the right to join together in unions and collectively bargain, we can't enforce that in California, as we've talked about before. And so while we look at some of these innovative experiments of what we can do under state law, sectoral bargaining and other things, I think it's important that we call out that there's a tension that for workers that are covered under existing labor laws, that we don't undermine those in our efforts, but that we really focus our efforts on workers who have been excluded from federal labor law. So, thank you.
Thank you, Doug. John.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'll try to be brief as well. There was a lot in the report from Saru and Betty that I think was really helpful, and I really want to embrace. I won't go through the whole laundry list, but I'll certainly echo the comment around enforcement. You know, what we've learned through this crisis, and frankly, we already knew it, was without adequate sort of state protections in enforcing the laws, it doesn't matter what laws we have on the books. And so we really need to emphasize that, and I embrace that. I do want to call out the issue of sectoral bargaining as well. This has been something that's been floated around quite a bit in the public discussion and policy circles, and some of the worst violators of labor laws have been proposing this. So it's obviously an extremely complicated and nuanced issue. And frankly, as a representative from a retail union, I'm a little surprised that this is the first I'm hearing about this proposal. We are not going to allow this process to set workers back. And what we've actually been engaging in throughout this process of the pandemic, particularly around health and safety standards, is frankly sectoral bargaining in the state of California. But unfortunately, getting the results of that bargaining enforced requires, it seems, a union in the workplace. To think you're going to be able to extend it beyond unionized workplaces without having a real union has proven to be false. I would be very eager to discuss the details of that with the proponents of any proposal around sectoral bargaining, particularly in the retail sector, offline.
So valuable. Can we do this, Betty and Saru? If you have, just take a minute to react, and then we're going to move on to the next priority area.
Yeah. Saru, do you want to start?
Sure, I'll come off mute. I'll start with Art's. I don't think it's a question. I think it's a comment, and I think we both all, or many of us, agree that we have to fight against this Uber proposition. You know, I don't think there's much to say there except that we have to fight it. I do think one thing that we're missing in that's been different about the restaurant sector that we're missing in the gig space is any high road alternative to these companies. And so it'd be great if, as we're thinking about fighting these low road actors that all of you are mentioning, that we also think about what would it look like to have a high road alternative in that sector. That's unionized, yes, maybe even worker owned. I'm not going to talk about the jobs guarantee. Sounds like we're going to talk about that later. And sorry, we didn't have time, John, to talk to you. I think the sectoral bargaining we were talking about was not so much in retail. It's an experiment that we are launching in hospitality, but happy to talk to you more about it. I don't think that we had any particular desire to exclude anybody or have conversations without people. I think we were just talking about experiments that are, already kind of on the way in the hospitality sector and thinking about possibilities for what could happen for restaurant and retail and care in particular.
Yeah, and I'll just add to some of Roy's comments. I also mentioned the tax structure as something that we've not spent a lot of time on, and I'm not suggesting that become all of a sudden front and center to this commission's focus, that it is out there and could be a tool down the road. I do think that also to your point, Roy, that after we hear from all these groups, I mean, I know just with some we're going to see a lot of things just kind of fall, kind of similar strands, I think, falling through each one of those. And so, and then to Art's point, I'm looking forward to the priority about ensuring that there are jobs for everyone who wants to work. I mean, I think that's the other piece of this is, you know, how do we create the jobs of the future that aren't, and that may actually be the alternative to a lot of different things that, you know, we're trying to struggle with here. So I think I'll just end with that.
Thank you so much. Okay, I'm gonna move us to the next priority area. And again, there will be discussion each one. I think there'll be some overlap in each. So the next one is going to be led by Carla and Mariana. It's creating a 21st century worker benefits model and safety net.
Great. Thank you, Julie. And it's great to follow Betty and Saru, because in some ways, I think there's just a lot of overlap and intersection in our goals and in some of our ideas, because in some ways, when we talk about worker benefits and safety net, in particular the safety net, it's really, when you think about it, it's like reducing expenses as a way to eliminate, poverty. And it was great to work with Carla on this priority. And what we're gonna do is we're just gonna present a little bit high level, how we kind of approached the problem and solutions in this priority. And then we'll share some preliminary ideas, both moonshot as well as some of like actionable, like shorter term steps. So next slide. So just to like sort of restate the problem, it's in the sort of paragraph description, but it sort of fits into two areas. So one is that as of now, benefits are tied to employer and or employment status. So, and it's related to number two, which is the current suite of benefits. Or when we think about what is provided via the safety net, it's inadequate and inequitable. So you have employers who provide a certain suite of benefits, but it's really tied to which employer you have, whether you are in a collective bargaining agreement, in a union, etc. Next slide. So then the solutions in the employment is, we know that in the future, like now, employer, like worker arrangements are shifting, but there is certain workers who have never benefited from the current, benefits sort of infrastructure and system. And so the solutions, we put them into three sort of buckets. One is we actually have to expand the existing safety net. And this sort of came up in the last priority, right? It's like healthcare, childcare, elder care, basic income, training, housing, maybe jobs, get a jobs guarantee, right? So expand what we currently think of in terms of the safety net. The second is there's actually reforms that we can make to existing kind of benefits to be more accessible and inclusive. Looking at unemployment insurance, Social Security, earned income tax credit, paid leave, right? There's others. And then the third is really thinking about what is the kind of transformation in terms of the actual benefit systems, both in terms of administration, delivery, who pays for them, right? To ensure universality, portability, and efficiency, right? So in thinking about now, so we'll get into the specific ideas in a minute. Next slide. And thinking about kind of both the moonshot as well as some of the like shorter term actionable ideas, we want commissioners to really think about some of these questions, right? So what is financing, right? What are the potential financing sources? Who administers and delivers the benefits, right? Unions, work organizations, community organizations have played an important role in benefit delivery and administration, what is the role of the employer, worker, or especially if we start separating out benefits from employment, right? What is their role for the employer, particular in terms of funding and financing, worker organization and or the government? How do these different ideas impact raising standards and income, workforce participation, worker empowerment, especially workers that have largely been excluded and have no access to benefits or have extremely or very low incomes? And then obviously I think the guiding questions around how feasible is adoption and implementation, and what is the sort of time frame. Now I'll pass it on to Carla to sort of walk through kind of the moonshot and some of the preliminary ideas that we've had in this priority. Carla, if you're speaking, I think you may be on mute.
Yes, sorry. And my screen froze and somebody chose right now to do some gardening out somewhere in my neighborhood. So you may feel like your teeth are being drilled right now, but I'll do my best. I just wanted to say it was fantastic. I love working with Mariana on this. These are huge topics, so I am not going to allege that what we've put together is the comprehensive, analysis. This needs more work. We, and a lot of time, but I think we tried to come up with a mix of moonshot ideas and things that are really practical. And many of them build on what Betty and Saru said. They're different, but I think to some extent they're complementary. So we did also, Governor Granholm, who wasn't able to be here today, did comment a bit, so offered us a little input. And I did want to say in the chat, if you specifically know things about specific areas we're covering here, would you kindly let us know so we can contact you? Because these are huge topics and we need some, we need some additional thoughts on some of this. So we would really appreciate that, or people that you think we should be talking to. So on this, we put our big moonshot ideas. One is universal benefits. We figure it's inevitable as the nature of work changes that for some at least, and I recognize and respect what our union colleagues have been saying, for some who are not covered, it's going to be very important to full-time work for a single employer. So that's one big idea. Let's be proactive. Let's get it right. And then the second idea is, can we streamline and use technology to simplify how we assess benefit eligibility to reduce costs and maybe redirect the people who now spend all their time figuring out whether or not you're eligible for benefits, could instead be coaches or support to workers rather than just trying to process benefits. And can we do this more efficiently? Next slide. So the basic idea here is just, can we pilot? So we could have local pilot programs and universal benefits, portable benefits. Let's support some local pilots. And then we get into a number of specific areas. And I am going to go through these really fast, respecting time here, but I just wanted to give you a sense more specifically of some of the areas that we think need to be covered. So paid family leave. Right now, very low earners, very low income people can get 70% of earnings up to 6 weeks. For many people who are very low income workers, that's too little. And so it makes it really hard for them to take advantage. And so we need to raise that. Next slide. Unemployment insurance. Around this, I think, we're saying, and again, we're really targeting here the lowest income workers, those that are facing the biggest barriers. We think that for those with very low incomes, variable wages, part-time workers, entrepreneurs with very small businesses, they should be able to access UI support. as they are able to do now under the CARES Act, but, you know, can we persistently do that? And then can we, and this is probably one of the more important of the recommendations we want to make, can't we use UI, expand UI to pay people while they're in training? I think this is one of the most significant issues around support. We can pay for training, but we're not paying people while they train. And that is really an obstacle for upskilling, especially for people with the very lowest incomes. Next slide, please. On SSDI, and then we also come to SSI, I think the issue here is we need clearer, simpler work incentives. These programs have work incentives, but they're mind-bogglingly complicated. And so they're not well used. And these are safety net programs that are growing significantly in terms of budget implications, very big budget implications here. So can we, simpler work incentives, can we adapt the program so that they provide for people partial disability that permits work? We tend to be very binary. You can work, then you're on your own, you figure it out, or you can't work, then you're on aid. But we don't really have a lot in these programs that allows for a mix of both, to access the health insurance and to access some subsidy while working. So that's kind of the heart of that. Next slide is on SSI, very similar set of issues. I won't dwell there. Next slide, very important, another very important area, the Earned Income Tax Credit Program. I think the basic, maybe headline I thought is just, yes, we want to fight for worker power and better wages and benefits. Lord knows, yes. But let's also recognize that there may need to be complementary support from government for working people in reality. And how do we do that? And how do we do that artfully? In a way, that's the heart of this particular presentation. We've done very progressive on the EITC in California, so some big changes have happened. That's really exciting. The feds need to do more to change. I think California can be a big voice on advocacy. And then we want to emphasize streamlining delivery. This idea of getting it in your monthly check, automatic filing, free returns. EITC is not being utilized by most, I think, of the workers who are eligible for it. So I think that's low-hanging fruit. Next slide is on training support. So this kind of gets into that whole apprenticeship area. Art, you've been very articulate on this, and we're just making some suggestions here around, more CBO partnerships, more job types to be included, and then, just an emphasis here that around infrastructure and climate change, can't we, and this was something you all called out, Betty and Saru, can't we use the power of procurement, supply chain to link to companies that provide high road jobs and training, like social enterprises, which I've been talking about, that target people who are not included in the economy, and other businesses that really are leaning in on the training and decent jobs for people. So that's another thought. Next slide is just a few specific, there's a little more, a fund we're suggesting, dedicated resources to cover, essentially be able to pay people while they're training. I mean, this is just a return to the same point. We are probably not the most informed about Cal grants. Londe, I know you could give us a tutorial, but if there's something flexible we could do there, we'd like to see more, essentially paying people while they're training, paying for living costs while people are training. Next slide is more specifically just on some of the issues around justice-involved individuals. Credit is a huge issue. Getting driver's licenses back is a huge issue. There are some very specific recommendations on that front. So, we think that's really important. And then, again, and this seems like such a no-brainer, but on the topic of metrics, I mean, we really do not have clear metrics, for example, for CDCR that say, look, if you're going to have these employment programs, how many people are going to get jobs? what are their wages going to be, and how long are they going to retain those jobs? And let's have reports on that. Let's see if we're making progress towards that. So that could encompass probation, could encompass parole. And then, you know, we couldn't resist here subsidizing deeply affordable housing. I know we're not really straying into this topic, guys, but in California, not to mention it in a future of work report seems crazy, because there is just such a direct relationship to what, for very poor people, takes up, you know, sometimes 80% of their paychecks or incomes. Okay, next slide is TANF and CalFresh, and that is, there are untapped resources. CalFresh employment training is an uncapped entitlement. There are a lot of complicated administrative issues at the county level for accessing this for community programs, and you know, the state could do more around that. And then there are some adjustments we're suggesting around TANF to prioritize work and really allow people to get the upskilling that they need. And then we did a final slide on childcare. We're talking about entitlement for making everyone Head Start eligible for people under 5 who are in low-income families, and then obviously quality and pay of childcare employees are both key issues. So we have a few recommendations there. So I know that was a ton. We were trying, I don't know if we can do this, but we'd both like to know what you know more about so that we can, you know, get more data on some of these ideas. And then also, yeah, as Mariana has put up here, you know, what are there certain things that strike you as really essential from this very big set of ideas, so that we can really focus between now and October on some of the most salient and important. Mariana, back to you if you want to emphasize anything else.
No, that was great, Carla. I think we can open up. I don't know how many minutes we have for just hearing from other commissioners. Really, yeah, like which of things really you're excited about and it resonated with you, and then if there are any ideas that are missing that we should go and think about.
That's actually perfect framing of the questions. What really excites you and what's missing? We just have a couple minutes. So looking through, and Mary Kay, I know you're looking too. I see Maria. Let's start with Maria, and I see Senator Stern. Maria, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, just reacting. I mean, this is great things for us to consider, but I'm just reacting and sort of what I see of one thing that you mentioned, and that was that housing component, Carla, that you mentioned. Because I have been working with some companies and even some nonprofit organizations that are trying to figure out how do they solve for that problem for their employees. And I actually had one nonprofit who's looking at making investments in a just like a property so that they could offer housing. And I know that some big companies have done it in other states, but it's probably worth looking at that in California of how does that housing benefit, could that work in a state like ours where it's such a big problem and so expensive. When you mentioned it, it just really resonated with me. So thank you for thinking that through.
Great. Senator Stern?
The procurement concept, I was wondering if you guys just elaborate on that a little more, like what areas of procurement you think we could really be drilling down on. You mentioned a climate angle.
Yeah, I mean, I think look, there's tension around all these things, right? Because, you know, for example, yes, so climate change, definitely, and infrastructure, I think both offer a lot. And, you know, clearly there's a worker power or union interest in having public employees do certain things and not contracting out. And at the same time, we have a lot of small businesses in the state that play an important role providing employment and training to individuals who otherwise can't and don't get into the economy. So how we do that artfully and well and appropriately, I think that is a challenge. But definitely, I would say in infrastructure and climate change, those are the two areas that we thought there's the most promise. And we can get more deeply into the specifics on that, since that seems to be of interest.
Okay, if there are no other comments or questions right now, what I'm hoping that we can do is go to the next topic. And then, again, if people have stuff, please jump in and let us know. And hopefully at the end, there will be some time to come around and you will have heard all of the priority areas too. And maybe that will also be a way to facilitate more conversation. Mary Kay?
Julie?
Yeah.
Julie, I think Peter wanted to jump in.
Oh, thank you. I didn't see. Thank you. Peter?
Just one quick thing. I do think the linking the training to massive expansion of infrastructure and energy and climate spending, I think is a very good idea. I want to come back to that later. But more importantly, making it easy to deal with the government for benefits, organizing that. Almost every state has struggled with this. Almost every city has struggled with this. A few foreign governments have done this very well. Modern technology. One of our competitors at Salesforce is a company called ServiceNow that does a great job of organizing benefits inside companies. There's no reason why we should be primitive in how our citizens have to deal with the government to engage. This is a simple problem in a sense at a technical level. It's a difficult problem politically and organizationally, but there's every reason why within the next 2 or 3 years we could not radically reform how citizens of California engage to gain their benefits. There's no reason why this should be challenging, difficult, and problematic, and it doesn't need to cost very much. The idea of using Code for America as a partner in this is an excellent idea, and try to put it together quickly and directly. It should happen almost overnight. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Yeah, I just want to say unemployment insurance for sure in that. Okay, so let's move to Lance and John for priority 3, raising the standard and share of quality jobs.
Great, thank you, Julie. So I'll go ahead and start, and then Lance will follow up with some comments. And I think, the way Lance and I approached this recommendation area was to sort of frame some of the larger questions around this proposal area and invite, discussion as well as recommendations, specific recommendations for the next meeting. In other words, we don't have any specific recommendations to share at this time, but the expectation is that we and others will by the next meeting. I think, from my perspective, when I take a step back and look at all of the recommendation areas and reflect on the process that we have been engaged in over the past nearly 1 year, I think in particular about the real sort of framing and insight that was part of our first convening in Sacramento. And I recall, I believe it was one of the panelists, the economist Heather Boucher, who really sort of framed the issue differently than how it had typically been framed. And she said, it's not so much about a skills gap or a problem with what workers currently possess or are ready to take on. The issue is really about the jobs, raising the quality of the jobs, not emphasizing some, alleged deficit in workers themselves. And as we all know, the level of training and human capital formation in workers has continued to go up, even though job standards and compensation has gone down. So really, workers are not the problem. And I really appreciate that this, in this recommendation area may be the one of the recommendation areas that really frames that issue clearly and directly, perhaps in a way that some of the other ones don't. So with that sort of framing, I'll say I think this is the category of recommendations that really provide opportunities to focus on things that can be done to change work and to change jobs. And if you look, there's a fuller articulation of this proposal area in our April interim report, and I would recommend folks go take a look at that. It talks about sort of creating incentives for employers to create higher quality jobs, as well as sticks that can be used to incentivize those improvements in job quality as well. And in particular, I think, and this is something that's been repeatedly discussed by our commission throughout this process, is looking at the role of the state as a purchaser, as an investor, as a whole range of other sort of financial relationships that the state of California has with employers and firms in the state, and using that relationship to encourage and incentivize higher quality jobs. I think some of the background reading that we were provided with indicated that half of the jobs by some metrics I believe in the United States are not considered quality jobs. Frankly, I wouldn't be surprised if the number was actually higher than that. But I think, you know, we in California have a unique opportunity because of the size of our economy, the size of our state, and the significant relationship that the state has as a purchaser, as a contractor, as well as the tax incentives and a whole set of other incentive levers that could be utilized to really think creatively about how we can incentivize higher quality jobs. You know, before I turn it over to Lance, I guess the last thing I'll say in terms of some moonshot goals, I mean, I would like to think that we have, you know, a state where every job is a quality job, primarily because jobs that are not quality jobs are jobs that are not taken up, that people have the ability to either not be forced into taking bad jobs or have better alternative options before them. So I think for a moonshot goal, that's what I would identify. And I'll pause there and turn it over to Lance and then open it up for discussion.
Thank you very much, John. Appreciate that, and do appreciate the opportunity to work together with you on this goal. As John stated from the outset, we had our first opportunity to have a verbal conversation yesterday, and we agreed that a work plan between now and the next convening was going to be our wheelhouse. So sorry that we're perhaps slightly behind our counterparts, but the thought that we've put into it, we'll catch up to that for sure during the interim before the next convening. So look for some reach out from us in the interim. I think this area, in one of the conversations we had yesterday, was about we heard work adjacent as a phrase a lot, but this is goal adjacent to the other goals and objectives of the task force, of the commission. And that's what's so good about it. We've been talking about quality jobs and having a quality job index from, I think, the very first convening as one of the likely outcomes. And here we are 1 year later, really looking at it as one of the key outputs for our commission's work. So I'm looking forward to that. And I'll bridge John's comment just now. Every job has a quality capability or quotient. It's just a matter of how much that gets realized in every vocation, because we know our work is where we get and bring value to society. And even jobs that you may look at as, well, I really wouldn't want to have that job. There's still some quality aspects to it, but we just need to make sure that they're realized. How we define quality, though, in the form of an index is going to be really critical. And it should probably be as expansive an algorithm as possible to allow for many and multiple factors in defining that job quality index, not just pay and not just empowerment or voice, but there's going to be a whole amalgamation of several things in the quality area. And one thing that I mentioned to John yesterday in our conversation is that one of the best things that we can do for all jobs is to grow the pie, grow the opportunities, grow the number of jobs, grow the number of opportunities for people to advance, move along, or adapt so that they're not stuck in that one role and as John mentioned, having a job that they need to take or they must take rather than one that they want to take. And I think if we can combine all those and working with our other commissioners in the other subject matters, what we'll come up with will be a series of good ways to measure what are good jobs and being able to improve the lot of California. Ironically, during an extreme pandemic at the moment, both health-wise and environmentally wise. The fires have been exceedingly disruptive in terms of outdoor activity, and particularly for those that are working out of doors, has been quite challenging. And this whole year has been rolled up and measured by how we've been resilient and adapting to more than generationally significant challenges. I mean, these two things taken together haven't happened, but in our generation and this year. So I think if we can work toward that, get input from some of our counterparts, John, on the commission, but I think we are fully headed toward establishing a form of a job quality index for Californians, and it'll be important to get that formula correct, so that when we can say your job is an 8.4 on a scale of 10, that 8.4 is really going to mean something that's translatable to another vocation with an 8.5 or a 9.9, which is, of course, the objective on a 10 scale. But we do have our work cut out for us. John and I are committed to engaging directly and aggressively over the next 4 weeks, and we look forward to that. But the framework that John presented is great, and I'm looking forward to seeing the cross-pollination.
Thank you so much. So we do have a few minutes. Do anybody have any thoughts they want to share on this topic? Elements of a job quality index. Lance, what I see Carla. Did you see somebody else, Lance?
It was Carla.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, I see James also after me. Yeah, just a quick comment. Thank you so much. I think this is really central, as you said, and from the beginning is something we really want to address. The only thing I just wanted to mention here is I do think it's very important with, as you had mentioned, Lance, there are many dimensions of job quality and what makes for a high road job. And I think that the component of training and support has to be taken into account, whether that's in the context of an apprenticeship formally, where people are paid more as they are trained, but training is then provided. Because what I worry about is if everything is just high road job, and it's all defined around the wages that are paid to people, I worry that it could exacerbate the lack of inclusion in the economy because of the disincentive then to hire people or to provide training on the job, skill building, et cetera. So I just think that has to be very carefully done when we get to the point of defining quality jobs. Thank you.
And I guess I'm remiss in mentioning training. Our organization and our sector is so close to the training concept that for me, I live and breathe it. So for me, it's assumed. So thank you for raising that, because it's not the same across all industry sectors. And I'll just mention that we had Secretary Sue down at the Intech Center way back in February, if you can believe that. And we had the opportunity to showcase a training facility, the manufacturing space, that we had testimonials from graduates of that program that talked about their ability to go from here to here to here in very short order. So training, for me, is an assumed component, but thanks, Carla, for surfacing that.
Excellent. We have Betty and James.
Great, thank you. Great presentation. A couple things that came to mind. One is after the commission ceased to meet, I actually did take up some additional work with one of our earlier presenters, Rick Wartzman with the Drucker Institute, to look at, and this was really kind of along the lines of thinking maybe long-term we would set up some sort of a high road employment certification program. But he was able to reach out to various business groups as well as academics and some labor organizations to kind of talk about some of the attributes of what could comprise a job quality index. So I think I want to make that connection in terms of how to maybe have him just maybe help further the thinking about this to both of you. And then secondly, when I looked at this priority about the raising the standard and share of quality jobs, and I'm not even sure why my thinking got here, but the thing that came to mind was kind of the allocation of jobs, and just thinking about the issue about equity as it relates to place, and how there are just so many places in California where, and unfortunately growing numbers that are going to be really in need after these disasters and wildfires. But I think there's kind of an element there about how to think about reallocating quality jobs and job opportunities as well.
Great. James?
You can skip me. Carla was much, much more eloquent about a similar point I was going to make.
Well, and we look forward to your engagement. You know, John and I do, and we're looking forward to the next few weeks.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. All right, I'm going to move us. We have 2 more priority areas, and then it seems like we may have some time afterwards. So Roy and James on priority 4, future-proofing California with jobs and skills to prepare for technology, climate, and other shocks.
James, you're on mute. There you go.
Yeah, Roy, do you want to lead us off?
Sure. James and I spoke, and we are interested in getting your feedback on both how we are thinking about this issue generally and throwing out a few example recommendations, none of which James or I is saying, let's propose this, but all of which we would love to run by you in the name of you saying you're missing this other important thing, or that's not the right way to do it, or some such. So all you, James.
Yeah, I think in thinking about this one, we were thinking about it actually in 2 parts. That may not have been, and this draws from work. As you see, this one combines quite a few different recommendations we had on our list of 12. So the 2 parts that we thought about, one was preparing California for what we thought about as external shocks, whether it's pandemics, other natural disasters, climate change. So preparing for those kinds of shocks and impact, of which we know we're going to have many, many, many more. And we should just be ready, as we've learned from COVID and other things and fires, et cetera, et cetera. So that was kind of one part of what we saw as the task here. The other part had to do with preparing California for things that have to do with the impact of technology, whether it's automation, data in the workplace, how we think about skills adaptation, how we think about preparing workers with the skills that evolve and can adapt to jobs of the future, but also things that have to do with making sure that there is actually enough demand for the kinds of jobs that we think are going to be good jobs of the future. And so this in part links as well to the quality priority, as well as to the priority around employment for all those who want it. We know that there are industries of the future, and those industries of the future are going to require slightly different skills, slightly different capabilities. So as we think about future-proofing, it's about external shocks, it's about the impact of technology, but it's also making sure people are ready with the skills and able to adapt to what the future might bring. So that's kind of how we've thought about it. And we also thought a lot about, if you like, at least 2 kinds of goals, maybe a third. One kind of goal would be, we felt that if we aren't going to know whether people are ready and we future-proof, workers in California, we would hope we would see that in the, how many people are working in jobs of the future, or jobs that are about these external shocks and jobs of the future. So that we thought there would be a metric or at least a goal around, are people in growing occupations or growing arenas or growing sectors? Because if they are, it means that they're actually ready for the future. So one of the things we were going to take a look at is, if we think about these so-called industries of the future or jobs of the future, how many Californians are in them today? And how could we think about setting a goal for how many we want in those in the future? The other metric goal we thought about was to think about what percentage of Californians do we think feel prepared or are actually prepared for the future in terms of their skills, their adaptation. So that was another goal we thought about. We're struggling, at least for now anyway, to how to think about some of these technology in the workplace questions and what kinds of goals to think about there. So we're hoping to get your help when looking to commissioners like Fei and others who've thought about this. I know Julie thought about this, but we think the questions around technology and data in the workplace in a ways that is both beneficial to work and workers, but also lifts up working workers and hopefully also complements working workers is an important part of how we think about this arena. So those are some of the things we've thought about. We're probably going to reach out in ways that are appropriate for within our rules here to get your input and help. I know commissioners like Fei and Peter and Tom and others have thought a lot about this. And we've all had conversations about this space, but this is where we're trying to look forward rather than the past.
Yeah, and I'd just add, so just to throw out a few of the specific kinds of recommendations that we might consider. And, you know, just in terms of framing this section, I'll just say, if you look back at the past, I don't know, 50 or 100 years in the United States, the shock that delivered the future to our country was California in a lot of ways. And so thinking of how we define the terms that we want to see in the future feels like one of the areas where we can be optimistic and positive and not just in an issue resolution mode. There's certainly so many issues to resolve. So let me throw out a few examples. One, calling on the federal government, and if it doesn't, then looking at state mechanisms to put in place a jobs guarantee with priority areas that might be set in collaboration with a large employer we have that already works with part-time and volunteer employees, which is the National Guard. Something like a disaster response corps. Imagine if we'd had an isolate and trace corps ready to go. A second area, funding in a collaboration with federal and state government again, 3 new national labs near inland California locations. Those national labs have done such good for the country and for the local areas around them. And we could, as a commission, define the areas. It might be epidemiology, might be climate change, it might be biotechnology. A third area more around skills and technology. As an example, again, every high school in California should offer vocational training and self-employment, which would be largely around technology skills. And the last one, and Betty here, this is, I have your comment on the tax code in mind. So this is more an area for consideration again than a proposal, is California doing some kind of payroll tax subsidy or other amendment to the business facing tax structure for apprenticeship programs, where students in high school and college can develop work experiences and relationships with potential employers. We're groping for something that feels as specific and evocative around the role of technology in the workplace and collaboration with people and machines. I don't know that we have such a thing. And I honestly think some of the other areas that folks are thinking about, like worker voice, may end up picking that up. Like we may not need a specific proposal on how to handle what data about collection of information in the workplace is required if we have strong worker advocates who can do that work and figure it out on a sector by sector basis or otherwise. So those are some of the things to throw out, some of the areas we struggled with. And the kind of input that would be most helpful is, you totally missed this area, please consider it. Hey, I hate that idea, don't think about it again because, or hey, you left out this idea that we should certainly be thinking about. Those are 3 kinds of things that are feedback that would be really valuable to us. So thank you. And James, anything I left out?
Yeah, let me add a couple other ones. I think back in the positive and exciting, we also thought that California in particular has a unique opportunity to do some signature initiatives working with the leading universities who are at the forefront of these technologies and AI that we're talking about. So we're looking hopefully to commissioners like Feifei and others to help us think through this, given you lead one such institution focused on human-centered AI, for example. We also think that this is a place to bring in some of the leading technology companies to actually commit to helping California navigate this in a different way, perhaps, than it's worked out. So there's got to be kind of exciting collaborations about technology in the workplace so that this all actually ends up in a good place that involves some of the technology companies in California.
Fantastic. I think, can we go to Feifei first? for comment here, and then we do have a few minutes for others.
Yeah, sure. First of all, fantastic. I think you guys have really laid out the framework in such a wonderful way. And Roy was asking, you know, what are the must-dos or avoid this at all costs. I just don't see all these extremes. You really have done a great job. Of course, biotech is another one that wasn't on your slide per se, but you already mentioned it. I actually have a question about how we think about potential legislative commentary or suggestions, because what we have seen in the past couple of decades out of California, when there is massive disruption and some positive, some negative in terms of the nature of work, we also, a lot of people feel we missed some of the most important legislative opportunities, whether it's on data front, privacy front, and all that. So, so while we are projecting and forward looking at the future job composition and opportunities for workers, how do we also take this opportunity to be at the forefront of a, you know, to advise important legislative opportunities so that we don't get into the same issues, whether it's guardrails or regulatory efforts and so on. So that was one thing that was running through my mind when I was thinking about this.
I was going to hold off commenting, Feifei, in case there are other questions and comments from others, so that we take them all at once. Julie?
That sounds great. That sounds great. I think I thought, oh, go ahead, Feifei.
Sorry. I didn't know if it was a conversation. If not, I just want to make one more comment and then move on to other commissioners. Is I really, really love what Roy said about national labs opportunities. I think we really, really have a lot of opportunity here, whether it's climate-based, sustainability and climate-based, or future of work. Our higher education system here lends itself to possible leadership. At HAI at Stanford, we are pushing for national labs related to cloud computing and machine learning AI computing. So this is an area that I think California really has an opportunity. So love that idea. Thank you.
That's fantastic. Well, that seems like a great segue to Dr. Coley. And I think Dr. Coley and Betty.
Yes, I just think all of this has just been outstanding. All of the presentations. One of the things that I'd like to just put on the table, and maybe in a so-called parking lot, is one of the things that's become very clear in this COVID environment is the digital divide. And I think the things that we are recommending certainly have implications to the need for eliminating the digital divide in California. Whether it's, and we're particularly seeing this where we're in virtual instruction. And so their homes, their geographical areas, their income levels that don't have access, and it needs to start early in life. And so I hope that this might be another consideration that would come out of this great work.
Thank you. Let's go to Betty and then Peter.
Great, thank you. I really like this presentation because it's just so it gets your imagination going. So I really enjoyed that. I also wanted to mention the digital divide. So thank you, Dr. Coley, for raising that, because I think that's just so foundational to the possibilities that could take place here. I wanted to just, I don't want to lose the opportunity of kind of what's before us, and that is the disproportionate impacts that COVID and the recession has had on particular communities. And sometimes I think when we talk about the private sector or tech companies coming in, and I'm all for tech for good, but I just don't want there to be unintentionally just kind of a cherry picking of focus. I think we have a tremendous opportunity, particularly knowing some of the public health needs are going to be exactly what we're going to need to have in place for climate stress as well. And so is there a way to really think about being intentional about where some of these opportunities reside, and maybe a huge gap to try to overcome in terms of skills, but I think that's exactly where we need to invest in some of these low-income communities of color that have had the most impacts from the pandemic and the recession, but also I think where we can help communities build resilience going forward as well.
Peter?
Thank you. Just 3 quick comments. I loved something that Roy said, and I want to propose a major change that reflects on it. Roy said that California was the shock to the nation. And I thought that was a brilliant insight. Whether it was the birth of the aerospace industry, Silicon Valley, the rise of the new labor movements in agriculture, we shocked the nation in so many different ways. So rather than talking about future proofing, maybe we could talk about future creating. Future proofing implies we are the victim of the future and we want to prevent any negative consequences of the future. In fact, California has been creating the future for many, many decades. So I propose that this goal be changed from future proofing to future creating. And that what our goal is, by the actions that we take, assure that our citizens are well protected in that future. So future creating rather than future proofing. Point number 1. Point number 2 is early in the discussion, which I thought was very useful, there was the point about making sure that we create good jobs in light of the evolution of the labor market, for example, the creation of jobs in healthcare, elder care, etc. The problem with that standing alone is that there are likely to be major gaps, mismatches between the population and the new jobs. So for example, it is very clear that many of the jobs in elder care, healthcare, et cetera, are mostly jobs taken mostly by women. Like it or not, that is the reality. As compared to jobs in other sectors that may be more men. And we have seen more jobs created for more women in the state historically than for men as a result of these sectoral shifts. So I think what we need is an ongoing analysis of the matches and mismatches in the evolving labor market between the jobs being created going forward and the labor force that is rising to meet those jobs. We have institutions at the University of California, places like the California Center for, or the Continuing Center for the the Center for the Continuing Study of the California Economy. In other words, institutions that look at some of these kinds of questions, and we should specifically, in other words, carry the work of the commission on beyond that with a specific injunction to look at these mismatches and help guide programs that help fulfill those needs. And finally, on the technology side, I think we can emphasize the notion that there are technologies that support workers rather than replace workers. For example, augmented intelligence, or rather than robots, physical devices that enable workers to do their job with less strain, for example, in agriculture. So I think emphasizing the technologies that enhance and support workers rather than replace workers is a huge opportunity that I think many companies in the state would welcome.
Great, thank you, Peter. James and Roy, any quick reflections? Take a minute or so for that.
I'll just say I really appreciated all the input, and I think all of those points are well taken, including what folks have been writing. So thank you.
Yeah, I would just add the same, but also make just maybe an observation across several of the suggestions. There seems to be in this space, in this one, a desire to have things that feel like an ongoing recommendations, whether they are ongoing monitoring institutions to study this or to look at that or advise on this or to comment on this, that or the other. So we may want to think whether this is the Institute's idea, but this feels like there's an ongoing set of institutions or things that may need to be put in place in this one. The second observation is perhaps an attempt to answer Feifei's specific question about legislation. I think this is one where, of course, again, this Commission is not going to be writing any legislation, but I think there may be some advisory work that this commission can provide to those who are doing that, just to make sure that even as action gets taken on climate, or on technology or in any of these shocks, that there's a work and worker lens brought to that, that draws from the work of this commission. But, oh, by the way, one other thing that about on the digital divide, thank you for all of you for bringing that up. This is one that's come up, I think, as Betty and Mary Kay and others know, even in the task force, where there's a huge effort, because a lot of the future proofing, if we still keep that word, or the future creating, does require that we have a digital infrastructure and that everybody has access to it. So if we're quite serious about our first principle of equity of people and place, then the digital divide is very central to this area we're talking about here.
Wonderful. Okay, perfect. Actually, and this is a great segue into our last priority area. And I also want to acknowledge people who are putting comments in the chat. Really appreciate that too. And Tom just put one that says the best way to predict the future is to create it. So I'm going to turn this over to Tom and to Maria to talk about priority 5, ensuring there are jobs for everyone who wants to work.
Great. Thank you, Julie. And let me see. I do know Tom is, oh, there he is. Sorry. Tom, I'll kick this off and then pass it over to you. Is that okay?
Absolutely.
All right, great. Well, I mean, all the presentations have been great, and I think it's only going to feed into this conversation. Our topic is ensuring there are jobs for everyone who wants to work. And several of the points that have been made throughout the this morning have touched upon some of the points that I think both Tom and I feel and have shared amongst ourselves. I think the way we would like to, conduct this discussion, I'll share a few comments, so will Tom, but we were really hoping to get a lot of your feedback into this conversation as we built this out, as we've had limited time to actually connect live, he and I. But when we talk about this, and in just giving you in the context of the approach, a lot of you have talked about, sectors. And I think in this particular topic, we have, Tom and I both mentioned, should we be looking at sectors? Should we be looking at those high growth sectors? Because if there are jobs to be had, we need to know where it's the easiest to ensure that jobs are growing. That's definitely one of the points that I think has resonated. Entrepreneurship, and that was mentioned in a couple of the presentations, and how we go about supporting entrepreneurship, because we know that that is obviously another area where jobs are created and where there could be opportunities to increase there. I think that could be a wide range of, how we support that, whether it's through teaching it in the schools, like somebody mentioned that, or ensuring that for existing entrepreneurs that there's support in that area. Another thing that was raised to us was around social enterprise, and I will ask that one of our commissioners speak to that, because thank you, Carla, for some of the ideas that she sent through with regard to social enterprise. But I think you all know that that's a growing area for this next generation, is creating jobs in mission-driven industries. And I think we can't ignore the fact that that's such a growing sector and could really help address many of the barriers that workers seem to experience. So we can talk a little bit about that. I did want to mention a little bit about the moonshot. What is the moonshot? And just food for thought for all of you. When we're talking about access, many times we have to think about, well, what's the barriers and how do we address those barriers first? And a lot of you have touched upon, the training that's needed, the reskilling. In my opening introduction, I mentioned how the acceleration of technology and how that has just really moved employers to switch to a different model. As that happens, to the extent that that impacts workers, we need to be ready to ensure that there's on-ramps for, you know, if you're leaving one job, you can move right into a new one. I know that one of the things that I see a lot, especially in working with universities, is the recognition that there needs to be lifelong learning, so that workers always have that opportunity to go in and out of the workforce as things, you know, as there's job transitions. I think, Betty, you mentioned that. And I think there's a way that for us as Californians to be innovative in this particular way that we handle job transitions. I think the other thing that I wanted to make a point about is when we talk about the future proofing, I do believe that there's a close correlation with our educational systems. Like I mentioned, you know, the lifelong learning. So it's not just for youth, not just a 4-year you know, time frame. It is over the length of employment. With that, let me stop right there because Tom, I know that you wanted to touch upon you know, sector work and especially some of the things that California has going on with in terms of the goals in particular industries. So let me pass it over to you.
Thank you, Maria. So I wanted to build on 2 issues that Maria addressed. One was the opportunity to create green jobs in California. And Saul Griffith, who is the CEO of Other Labs, which is based in San Francisco, and Alex Lasky, the co-founder of O-Power, have developed a plan called Rewiring America, which would not only dramatically reduce greenhouse gases and fight climate change, but create 25 million jobs in the United States. So obviously it would create a significant number of jobs in California alone. And so what I wanted to find out from Julie is if there are ideas that have come to our attention that are at the intersection of job creation and another area of public policy, namely in energy and climate. What's the best way to engage your colleagues who have the ball on that? Let me just give you a brief overview of the analysis. The Saul, who is a MacArthur Genius Award winner, did a very detailed analysis for the Department of Energy on the U.S. energy system, and has noted that there are a set of technologies that have come down in price sufficiently to the point where if we could lower the interest rate, if we could lower the soft costs associated with solar, which are driven by permitting and installation, and we could make some changes in how the grid operates, then the average American household would be $1,000 to $3,000 better off. Namely, that the energy savings that they would get would more than offset the interest payments that they would need to pay for solar, batteries, electric vehicles, and electric appliances. So rather than saying you should do this, but it's going to be more expensive, to say America should do this and they will save $500 billion or $1,000 to $3,000 at the household level. However, that's not going to happen without some changes in public policy. It won't happen without the ability to finance this at a lower interest rate, not a 7 to 10% interest rate, but think more, 4% or lower. It won't happen until we meet the progress that countries like Australia have made in terms of lowering soft costs. And it won't happen without some changes in public policy that affect the electric grid and have a grid that is a little bit more like the internet than today's electric grid. So I think that this is a huge opportunity. I think it addresses 2 big priorities for the state. One is to lead on climate, and the other is to create good jobs at good wages for every Californian who wants one. And I'm excited about the idea and would be interested in what the opportunities are for collaboration with your peers who are in the driver's seat on energy and climate. That doesn't mean that we don't also need, excuse me, continued innovation in areas like how are we going to do carbon neutral long distance air transport? How are we going to deal with the carbon intensity of steel and cement? But the point is that we can make a big dent in this problem, about 70% of it, through the accelerated deployment of technologies that are here today. I'm in favor, as the next person, of continuing to invest in fusion and other breakthrough technologies. But even if things were to go as well as possible, we would have pilots of those technologies in 2032, and we can't afford to wait. We have to start with the accelerating the deployment of technologies that exist today. So that's one thing that I wanted to talk about. The second is and Maria also addressed this, California should have as a goal that we're preparing our people, our young people, not only to get a job, but to create jobs. So one of the things that a serial entrepreneur in California who is instructor at both Stanford, UC Berkeley, and UCSF has done is to develop a curriculum that I think should be not just available in the UCs and in the private research universities, but should be available in CSUs and other institutions of higher education, is really giving young people the conceptual apparatus that they need to engage in entrepreneurship, and a recognition that there's a very strong correlation between entrepreneurship and the scientific method, which is, rather than saying, I have a 5-year business plan, I'm going to go out and execute that. A startup is an organization that's operating under conditions of very high levels of uncertainty. So you might have a hypothesis, but you have to go out and engage in experimentation to confirm, refine, or refute whatever your hypothesis is. There are some universities, like University of Maryland, that have integrated these ideas related to things like the lean startup and human-centered design into the core undergraduate curriculum. And I think that California should have that as an aspiration as well, so that, again, more of our young people are prepared not just to get a job, but to create jobs. As folks like James will know, based on the economic literature, the net job creation is not about small versus big companies. It's about new versus old companies. That is, a lot of the net job creation comes from firms that start off small and have the aspiration of getting big, and those that do wind up creating a disproportionate amount of jobs. And if we prepared more students to engage in that type of activity, I think that it could do one of the things that is most important for an inclusive economy, is most important for economic and social justice, and that is a tight labor market. There's no single thing that we could do that would be more important for increasing wages for all Californians, not just a lucky few, and that would be to rev up our engine of entrepreneurship and economic growth and job creation. So those are two ideas that I would be interested in getting the committee's reaction to, and I'd be interested in Julie's thoughts about how we might engage some of your colleagues on the green jobs, and not just sort of in a vague aspirational way, but what's the strategy that would dramatically reduce greenhouse gases and create these jobs. And a lot of these are installation jobs that cannot be outsourced. So these are great jobs to have more of it in California. Thank you.
Fantastic. Tom, there's so much to say about that. I'm going to first defer to Oh, Maria, go ahead, Maria.
No, I was gonna say, you'll do the facilitate. I know there's questions in the chat, so I'll let you do your role.
Maria, please jump in. I have Fei and I have Peter, but please, Maria, so go, and James. Fei, Maria, Fei, Peter, and James, and then Maria, please jump in. We can also do this together. You know, and then there's specific questions about, you know, what Maria and Tom put out there for reaction. So your comments and reactions. Fei.
Yeah, so great work, Maria and Tom, and can agree more. Entrepreneurship is so fundamentally so critical for the DNA of America and especially Californians. So I just, in the spirit of future forward looking and thinking about both incentives and guardrails, I want to bring up this interaction we're seeing more and more is platforms and entrepreneurship. That powerful tech platforms are affecting entrepreneurship in a way that is never seen, unprecedented. And we've never seen that in history, whether it's retail, entertainment, and all that. And the effect of entrepreneurship and small businesses right now is both positive and negative in many cases. So just going forward, I think the technology platform effect of impact on entrepreneurship is going to be more and more profound. And we should help California workers to prepare for this, both through education, public policy, again, policy incentives, as well as regulatory guardrails. Because I think if we don't make some changes right now and prepare for even more profound changes, this might be both harmful and also impact our entrepreneurship in ways we might not be prepared for.
Thank you, Fei. Okay, I have a whole line here, Maria. I don't know if you're seeing others, but I've got Peter, and then Roy, Betty, Henry, Doug, and I just saw Carla. So I think let's react to this priority 5, but also if people want to comment on any of what they've heard, can we just put that all in now so that we have enough time for all kinds of comments? So Peter.
Thanks, Julie. I want to put this in context. Let me say I totally agree with everything that Tom and Maria said. So yes, to all of that. But we are in a unique context, a unique situation as a result of the pandemic. I've been doing, not surprisingly, a fair amount of scenario planning for Salesforce, our customers, and others. I will be happy to share a video of the scenarios with all the members of it. I'll send it to James, and you can distribute it if you like. It's a half-hour video on what's going on in the world. But the upshot of it is this. We are in a situation that is akin to a major war. That is, the scale of disruption to our economy has not yet been fully felt. This will continue on for quite a long time. The tearing apart of the economic fabric of small business relationships, etc., will not be woven together for years. We are going to be in this dire circumstance for quite some time. The implication of it is that, like a war, you want to spend. You want to fill in the income hole. We've lost vast amounts of income. That income needs to be folded in. This is not stimulus. This is filling in the income hole. Fortunately, we have a Federal Reserve that has recognized this and that is essentially making money available at 0 interest rates. So we are at a time where we both need to spend and can afford to spend. That is, at a scale like is the equivalent of World War II. And so we need to be moving very fast to be able to scale up infrastructure spending and all of the kinds of spending that we've talked about here that create jobs. This is a unique opportunity, create apprenticeships to rise with those new jobs, create educational opportunities to rise with those new jobs. And in addition, we are already in a demographic hole. We stopped having babies a long time ago. We're going to see a declining size of labor force unless we keep older workers in and use undocumented workers so far. So we have the opportunity to keep more jobs and the necessity to do that at a higher level. So it is both and create better jobs through spending and enable workers who would otherwise be left behind, either undocumented or older workers that we're going to need. So this is a historic opportunity to create the future rather than wait for it to happen to us. This is, I think, a necessity of the moment. And if we don't take this opportunity, we're missing a huge opportunity to reinvent the state in the midst of a crisis.
Fantastic. Peter, Roy.
I just want to pull at the thread on entrepreneurship, unsurprisingly, because I think that was better put, Tom, than what I'd said earlier in our section about self-employment. You know, the kind of merger of learning how to test things and managing risk for yourself is, to me, the essence of the startup method. And this is a significant enough idea that I just want to ask whether, in addition to something like a jobs guarantee, it might be a big enough idea to cut across several of the sections and really be overarching, because it is a wholesale change in how we think about young people and preparing them for the future. The American model since World War II has been a get educated, get a job, be employed, be safe, get your health care, ... And that model is working for some, but not all. But if you look at the people who created the restaurants that employ SARU's members, who who create the organizations that build the jobs, they're in a way operating outside the system that we've created. And California could shape a different way of thinking about it.
Eddie?
Thanks, Julie. I want to echo that sentiment because I'm also thinking about this being a way to also just bring in the work enabling sectors like care as well. So not to ignore that aspect of it. I'm looking at Senator Stern on my screen because I'm really, as I'm thinking about all these great ideas, I'm just like stressing out over how government's going to deliver. And we have got to be more nimble and just like do a deep dive on where we've got capacity to really deliver on some of these things. And I'm just going to put this out there, but exactly what you've described in terms of entrepreneurship, the financing authorities and the treasurer's office. I sit on all of them. We make awards all the time, usually to big companies. I generally like to prefer the small ones, but the whole idea behind many of those was to experiment, was to kind of get out there ahead of the curve on technologies and to see what worked. And we've really gone way beyond that to now just awarding things to companies that have the loudest voice. And so I think there's a lot of capacity that we have, but it's going to have to get repurposed pretty quickly.
Great segue, Henry. Oops, Senator, we can't hear you.
I've just resigned to overflowing your chat room with my thoughts. So just that should suffice. But to Betty's point, we got to get more ambitious about spending big and not just the normal kind of spending, but capacity spending like expansion and financing and securitization and other ways to flex money. But also, I'm going to say to James just now, the more we can get this group prepared and the more solid this report can be, you talk about Biden's $2 trillion climate plan and his $750 billion care plan, and both climate and care sort of aligning here, the more durable and investable sort of our framework is, I think the more ready we'll be to really go. And I see like the SEIU IHSS worker as the climate worker of the future. Like I don't see it's not just electricity is electricity and care is, right? Like we have to blow up boxes here and really reimagine the lines.
Great. Doug?
Thank you. Well, Betty and Henry queued me up perfectly. As we've discussed here, our state budget is really a values document. And California, through this commission, is in a position to lead on the national stage in aligning our values and our goals here with all the money that goes out the door. And so I actually am going to put some language in the chat box. I'll read it here. But I feel like this commission should put forward a recommendation to support legislation that links state spending on contracts for services or goods procurement, tax incentives, grants, low or no interest loans to high road job creation, with accountability and transparency. I think we can do this, and we can lead on it and set a model for the rest of the country.
Great, Doug, thank you. Carla?
Just wanted to speak to the point Maria made and maybe just try to connect the dots this way. There are about 8 million people in California who have a criminal record. They have a 50% chance, as opposed to others, of being called back for a job interview or to get a job. We have entrepreneurs. We have the most robust employment social enterprise sector in the country. I would really like to see those words in this document: employment social enterprise. We're never going to get anywhere on creating more and enough unless we call it something. So let's name it. Let's say what it is. And then I'm just, again, just to repeat the concern, we're about to have a huge slew of, unfortunately, more people are going to become homeless. And we have a lot of people who've been some people, thank God, who have been let out of incarceration, but they're struggling to find jobs. And we have entrepreneurs who are creating businesses intentionally to provide jobs to those individuals with the kind of support and training that can help them get into the mainstream economy in the right way. And I just want to call it out because I get concerned that if everything is about high road jobs, which God knows we need, we may have the unintended consequence of only creating situations that work for some and that some are excluded from. So I just want to be sure we encourage entrepreneurship, job creation, business creation that targets inclusion of people in the economy along with training and support. And we've said there's a lot of ways to do that, but that was the main point I wanted to make.
Thank you so much, Carla. I think that is all the people who have, James, I'm going to turn it, you go first. Go, James, go.
Yeah, I was going to add a comment that I like a lot all the suggestions that have been made, but I think with this one, which is number one, which is making sure there's enough work for everybody, the one thought I'd like to suggest we think about, maybe I've been influenced by spending a lot of time with people like Janet Yellen and other economists, which is at the end of the day, one of the key things that guarantees that there is work is actually if there's demand for work. So I think this question of demand for work, and I think there's a role that the state can play, at least in two ways. We know that there's work that needs to get done, climate adaptation. We know that there's work that needs to get done, the care economy. We know that there's work that needs to get done, preparing for disaster relief and fires, et cetera, et cetera. So is there something, maybe this is analogous and side by side with Doug's point earlier about investment, where the state itself creates demand, especially if that demand not only creates jobs, but also jobs in areas where we need the work done, climate adaptation, care work, et cetera. So I think there may be a way to link those two ideas together.
Great. Dr. Coley, did I miss you earlier? Would you like to say something?
I just wanted to add on the point that was just made about entrepreneurship. And looking at that, one of the greatest barriers is is not having access to wealth, not having access, and women and racial ethnic groups particularly don't have access to the resources that would even allow them to expand and extend their entrepreneurial ideas. And so I'd like to just, based on what is already been said, I certainly agree about the entrepreneurship and its connection to the demand that is in the state. So thank you.
Okay, wonderful. So this was so rich. And before I turn it back to our co-chairs in the end, and then we're going to also have Londe will, I want to remind the people who are participating in the public that we are going to do public comment also, is I just wanted to, I guess, offer a couple of sobering things, but also say something to Tom's question. So I feel like this is, it's a rich conversation anyway, but it's also one of the things that we've been saying, I've been saying as labor secretary, and I think, something that this administration really embraces is the notion that every great policy goal we have, and this is long before the pandemic hit, is a chance to create good jobs in the communities that need them the most. Climate, one of them, but so many, right? Housing, high-speed rail, everything that we want to make the state into, there are job creation opportunities for high road jobs. So I think, Tom, there's a much deeper conversation to have to your question, but we've been thinking a lot about it. There was just a 400-page report that came out around climate and high road jobs, which I will make sure, Tom, that you get as well. But I really want to dig in more concretely with you, because I think what you're raising is specifically what we were trying to say in that report, which we presented to the legislature. So I know Senator Stern and Assemblymember Caldwell will be familiar with that too. I think the sobering things I want to mention are, one, we have a window of time in which to arrive at a report for this commission. And the richness of this conversation also demonstrates one of our challenges, which is, we've had this from the beginning, right? Is how big do we want to go? How broad do we want to go? And I just want to remind us that one of the things that we said, not that it can't change, but I think as we're reaching the end of the life of this commission, I want to remind us that one thing that we all, I believe we all said, and I'm looking at everybody to see if I misstate anything, but is rather than getting a long list of things, despite the number of great ideas, we wanted to focus our attention in ways that sort of reflected our values as a commission and the values of California as a state. I think there's been some great ideas that came out of here that will pivot us some, but the task between now and basically October and then December is going to be to come up with some focused recommendations. It's not to say that some of the things that have come up that are exciting can't happen elsewhere, right? I've said this many times, and I think all of us have found this through our time on the commission, is the communication, the relationships that are built are chances to do other great things. But in terms of the recommendation of the commission itself, we didn't want to do even 12, but much as 20 or 24, a long list of things. We wanted to really focus on some moonshot, but also actionable recommendations that are aware of the moment that we are in, right? So moonshot are big ideas. Actionable means we have to do the hard work of figuring out how we make them happen, right? We're not, and no shade on those who write and think for a living, but we are also in the action space. So how are we going to make the good ideas that we have into things that we want to happen? There may be also pieces of that we don't need to include, like we're not going to include necessarily like specific legislative language, right? But we do have both the senator and the assembly member on the commission who can help to give things flight once we arrive at them. So we are really trying to come up with what our recommendations are, and of the moment means we are living in a time, right, where again, when we started this, I think we all thought, I look to Londe for confirmation here, but we thought, we were in a decades long growth, and we wanted to figure out where we put all of California's, the great stewardship of the budget into these grand ideas. We're not living in that time anymore. So part of what we have to think about is how we better utilize resources that are there. And I think, Betty's spoken to that, and I think that's really exciting. But also, I think there's a piece of this that has to be, and given the timing of this report, right, it's no longer coming out in May or June of 2020 in a time of economic boom. It's going to come out in December following a national election that I think for all of us, right, we recognize is more defining than any in generations. So what do we want to say also about what California can do, but how do we also maintain California's sort of, competitiveness in a national landscape in which we don't control all of those answers? So I think there's some space for what I think our recommendations will be of the moment. They'll be actionable, they'll be moonshot and reflect those 5 priorities. They're also, it's not going to be a long list, right? I think, again, I'm looking to everybody to see if anybody's changed their minds on that, but I know we've gone through many processes where that's where we landed. But they can be examples for what we want the federal government, right, and possibly other states to do. That's part of the beauty of being in California. So I just want to remind us of that charge and those decisions that had come up. And I think the next steps will be to make sure that the co-leads have heard from you all. This, I saw a lot of the thanks from the co-leads. We are going to think about how we, consistent with our public body charge, continue to engage. So if those of you who have not had a chance to weigh in and is not a co-lead, we'd like to know what role you'd like to continue to play. But for the co-leads, there's going to be a tremendous amount of work between now and the next convening, where we will be able to distill and refine, but also limit the recommendations to those that really, are high level, priorities for all of us. Does that make sense? So it won't mean that everything that was said here isn't important or wasn't heard. It's just that what we wanted to do was come up with a report that was, really condensed what we wanted to do into a smaller number of high priority recommendations rather than a long list. So Mary Kay, and let me go to Saru or something, and then turn it back to Mary Kay and James.
So you called on me first, right? I'm all for having a priority and getting things done. And those of you that have been in these meetings with me for the last year know that I'm all about getting things done. I really don't like to sit around and talk. I'd rather think about action. And I don't know why that's has to be mutually exclusive from having a report that does list things that are not controversial, I don't think, in this group, and that are things that we agree on, but maybe they're not the focus of everybody. And the reason why I've shifted some on that, Julie, is that I guess I've come to feel like over the last years, I've been trying to figure out how to make the best use of this commission for the low-wage workers that I represent. Where I've landed is that for me, what's been effective is not so much all of us figuring out something and agreeing on something and working on it together, but rather on my own, following up with strands of things that have come up and pushing initiatives or programs based on those strands. So for example, there had been a lot of talk about high road programs, high road work. After we did that program in San Diego with some of you, to honor, to uplift high road restaurants, then what followed was that I was able to work with Secretary Sue and the governor's office on a program to provide grants to high road restaurants in this time that now has been replicated in New York and Detroit and Massachusetts. I just heard Boston's copying it. So that was an example of something that came out of this commission, but was kind of me taking conversations we had and running with it on the side, not necessarily involving all of you in it. And it would be helpful if there was a longer list of recommendations that we had agreed on, that allows some of us to run with some of those, even if it's not something we're all working on together. There are things in that longer list of recommendations. Another example is, James, you just talked about, there are ways in which the state should be, creating the demand that's needed to match the problems, create the jobs that are needed to match the challenges in our world. Some of that can happen through people not necessarily through big business or even small business, but through worker-owned cooperatives forming to address those things, and the state supporting that. And that's not something everybody needs to work on together, but if there was something in that list that said we should, the state should encourage that, I could run with that recommendation and go do something with it. So I'm not sure if I'm making sense, but it does feel like a longer list allows some of us to take some of those things and work with them. A longer list of things that are not things we'd have to fight over, but things that seem to have some general agreement that allows some of us to run with them. And then, yes, we can absolutely pick a much narrower, 1 or 2 things that we're all working on as a commission. Yeah.
Well, if I could jump in as we start to close and wrap up, I guess a couple of things, and by the way, some of this is in response, I think, to your comment, Saru. And I don't quite know how we will architect this in the report, but I always imagined we wouldn't lose anything, even as we focus. So to your point, I think it's both. So if you remember at the beginning of this conversation, one of the things I described is, I described kind of 4 goals, if you remember. Number 1 was to update the findings in the interim report, including our statement of the, if you remember, we had 11 problems that we identified, and we had 12 recommendation areas. We should update that. So if there are any additional ideas, so we're not going to lose anything. So that's one piece. We're not going to lose anything. We should have those things. Second, to your point, Saru, we can act in so many ways, including embedding things into the task force, including the kind of self-directed initiatives that you're describing, Saru, that don't need to be part of a complicated architecture. So if you remember that second goal, we should still do. What we're talking about with these priorities that Julie was referring to is the kind of the big signature moves that we're going to do. So it's not instead of that. So the 5 priorities here don't mean we throw anything else away. So I hope we need to just think about the architecture of the report, but it should include all of the work that we've done. So I don't know if that helps answer your question. If you remember in the notes that you all received from Julie, there was a draft document that Julie, Mary Kay, and us, we put together. If you can go back to those 3 or 4 goals, that's what we're trying to capture. If you look at that document, that we are going to update the full report, we are going to act and embed these things in lots of different places, and we are going to have this third thing, which is the big signature move, and that's what we spent all the time on today. It doesn't mean it's the only thing we ever do, I don't think. So I don't know if that answers your question, Saru. But in other words, I think we're agreeing with you.
Yeah, I wondered what had happened with that interim report. So I assume it'll be somehow integrated into this final robust thing.
Yeah, we just don't know. Don't ask us what the architecture of the report will look like if we don't know, but I think that's the intent. If you go back to those 4 goals that are in the notes that we all sent all of you. So with that, I think we just wanted to, Mary Kay and I think Mary Kay should jump in. We just wanted to thank everybody. It is from our perspective, and I think I speak for Mary Kay and for Julie on this, is that this actually far exceeded our expectations, given that the co-leads who've taken these on didn't have a whole lot of time to work on this and think about this. And quite frankly, you all exceeded our expectations. I think the challenge as we see it, at least as I see it, is what Julie said, which is how do we boil this down, this part of it, right? Keep in mind, I go back to our 4 goals here. This is the 3rd one about the signature moves. How do we boil it down to a very clear set of moonshot goals and actions that are very simple and very clear? That's our challenge, I think, at this stage, is my sense. But this has been terrific. So Mary Kay and Julie should all jump in, but this has exceeded my expectations at least.
Yeah, I just wanted to underscore how terrific the commissioners were that became co-leads. And I don't want to call every name, but I know this was on top of managing multiple crises in your personal lives, your organizational lives, and in the bigger world. So, and I think the contribution you each made created a lot of sparks in the chat and in the conversation that are going to sharpen and improve how we think about it. There's 2 things that I leave with questions about. I don't really know what commissioners think about the social compact frame and principles. So if you have reflections on that, it would help James and Julie and I in thinking about the architecture of the final report. Or if you want to drop into the chat, you're good to go with it, or you have one idea to add and you'll email us, that would be great. And then the second is the intersection of all the great moonshot jobs ideas with the final buzz that was created in the chat and in the group on this question of, are we going to stand for a jobs guarantee, one, and two, can you imagine creating the political will across civil society, government, corporations, wealthy, working people, for a big public revenue investment that isn't going to come from existing resources, but needs to get added to? And that's a key question that we've been grappling with on the task force. I know the state legislature and the governor have been grappling with. I think all of civil society has to be challenged by Peter Schwartz's imagination, because I know many of us in the chat supported it. But it requires investors beyond existing resource. And that's the block that I think the moonshots will create, the imagination that makes people think, okay, now's the time. We're going to unrig the rules and actually invest in a way that fundamentally restructures how the economy has worked and deals with the 4 crises that we're all grappling with together. So I just think that we're going to probably use, as Julie said in her next steps, the 2 co-leads interacting with the governor's team, James and Julie and I, and whatever you all want to offer by email to prepare a proposal for people to react to when we meet again in terms of the outline of the final report. So thanks again for the energy.
James. So I want to make sure the commissioners stay on for the public comment. And we, again, really appreciate the public's participation through the life of this commission. Lande? Oh, Lande, we are on mute.
I always do that. First of all, it has been a great conversation. So I just want to say thank you to all the commissioners for just your steady participation and brilliant ideas, and particularly those of you who really took the charge to really help think through these 5 elements, because I think there's just so much there that we can rally around and act on. I wanted to make sure that we did get to public comment. Our first commenter, I believe, is Maya Downs. And if whoever is operating the Zoom call could allow Maya to speak, that would be great.
Hi, this is Maya Downs.
Great. Maya, you have 2 minutes.
Okay, thank you. I am a social worker. I am a state employee in California, and have been trying to get some help on this issue for several years now. There is a government code, it's 19827.2, that is from 1981, that says for the state to adjust the pay scales for women of color and people of color and women in female-dominated job classifications. And that has never been implemented. The goal there was to close the gender pay gap in state civil service. And unfortunately, in California, we have the worst gender pay gap and race pay gap in the nation. And I've heard many of you talking today about the state walking its talk and leading by example. And I just really am asking for your help in this, because I've approached many elected officials, many people over the last years, and no one will take up this issue. So I'm just requesting your help in this commission. I've really appreciated listening to this meeting today, and I feel like you care and you're the experts, and this issue needs a champion. And it's more than just saying, oh, the unions can take care of it. You shouldn't have to negotiate for an equitable workplace. So SPB and CalHR were supposed to adjust the pay scales for undervalued, underpaid state civil servants, and they never did it. And so I'm just asking for an advocate in your commission to see that this is completed and achieved once and for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Maya. Really appreciate that that comment. Just by virtue of background, you should just know that the first partner is really very committed to issues related to gender equity. And so I'll make sure that we pass that comment on to her as well. But we also have a few legislators on the line who might be willing to champion that issue. There was also a comment from David Teasdale, and I don't know if David is available.
I don't think he's on Zoom.
Okay, well, maybe I'll just read what he sent me by virtue of commenting, which is that he said, Commissioners, while I like the direction the commission is heading, we do need to address youth employment and those who actually only want part-time work, such as college students and primary caretakers. So he would just like to remind us to hold those populations in mind. With that, there are no other items for public comment. Secretary Sue?
All right, then thank you to the public. Again, thank you to the commissioners. Our next meeting is actually, just so I put it out there and we make it public, on October 15th, Thursday, beginning at 10 a.m. So we will look forward to seeing everybody there, and we're ending right on time at 2 o'clock. So thank you also for that, an amazing feat.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.